Ethan Frost peered through the convent window and froze. A young nun knelt before a wooden table, her back covered in scars, wrists bound with rope. A priest stood behind her, whip in hand. When her gray eyes met his, she whispered words that would haunt him forever. "If you're going to do something, please don't. I'm not worth it. But if you're just going to watch, then go." 2 years ago, he'd walked away from a girl who begged for help, and she burned alive. Not this time. This is the story of how one man's second chance became a woman's salvation, and exposed an evil hidden for 15 years. The old man sat on the porch of his mountain cabin, weathered hands resting on the arms of a chair he had carved 40 years ago. The wood was smooth now, polished by decades of use, and Ethan Frost could feel every groove and imperfection beneath his palms. At 79, his body remembered things his mind sometimes forgot. The ache in his left shoulder where the bullet had gone through. The stiffness in his right knee from that fall on Eagle's Pass. The way his fingers curled slightly inward, shaped by years of gripping reins and rifle stocks. Below him, the valley spread out in shades of gold and amber. Autumn had come to Colorado, and with it, the kind of light that made everything look like it was burning from within. Ethan had lived through 79 such autumns, but this one felt different. Maybe because of the visitors climbing the trail toward his cabin. Maybe because he knew it was time to tell a story he had kept locked away for 40 years. Tommy Bradford reached the porch first, breathing hard from the climb. At 48, he was still strong, still carried himself like the man Ethan had taught him to be. Behind him came a boy of 15, lean and quick-eyed, stumbling a bit on the uneven ground, but determined not to show it. Tommy removed his hat. "Mr. Frost, thank you for seeing us." Ethan nodded, his eyes on the boy. "Samuel, is it?" The child straightened. "Yes, sir." "Your grandfather says you wanted to know who I am." Samuel glanced at Tommy, then back at Ethan. "Yes, sir. Dad says you're a hero, but he won't tell me why." The word hung in the air like smoke. Hero. Ethan turned it over in his mind, testing its weight. It felt too big, too clean. Heroes were men in books, men who never hesitated, never failed, never woke up in the middle of the night with their hearts pounding and their hands shaking. "I'm not a hero, boy." Ethan's voice was rough, like stones grinding together. "But I did make a promise once, and I kept it. That's what your father means." He rose from his chair joints protesting and walked to a wooden box on the windowsill. The box was simple pine darkened by age and handling. He opened it slowly. Inside, wrapped in cloth, lay two objects. The first was a badge tarnished and bent. United States Marshal, it read, though the letters were barely visible now. The second was a ribbon yellow silk, faded to the color of old parchment, small enough to fit in the palm of his hand. Samuel moved closer, drawn by curiosity. "Were you really a marshal?" "I was. A long time ago, before I came to this mountain. Before I learned what it really meant to stand up for someone." Tommy settled onto the porch steps, and Samuel sat beside him. They both watched Ethan waiting. The old man looked down at the valley one more time, at the spires of pine and the distant gleam of the river. Somewhere down there, hidden in the folds of the land, was Covenant Ridge, the town where it had all begun. The town where he had learned that sometimes doing the right thing meant going against everything you thought you believed. "This story," Ethan said quietly, "starts long before 1878. It starts in Chicago in the winter of 1876. I was 37 then, not old, but not young either, and I made a choice that would haunt me for the rest of my life." He paused, choosing his words carefully. The afternoon stretched long and golden around them as Ethan Frost began to speak of the winter when everything changed. December 1876. Chicago was a city of smoke and noise, a place where the stockyards ran with blood and the wind off Lake Michigan cut through even the thickest coat. The temperature had dropped to 8 degrees Fahrenheit that night, cold enough to freeze a man's breath in his lungs, cold enough to kill. Ethan Frost and his partner Daniel Morgan stood outside a warehouse on the south side of the city. The building loomed before them, 3 stories of brick and timber windows, dark except for a single light burning on the ground floor. The smell that came from inside was overwhelming. Rot and urine and something worse. Something that spoke of human misery concentrated in a small space. 6 children, Daniel said, his voice low. Ages 9 to 14, the tip said they're locked in a back room. Ethan checked his Colt Peacemaker, the weight of it familiar in his hand. Then let's get them out. They entered through a side door, moving quietly across wooden floors, slick with God knew what. The warehouse was a maze of crates and barrels, shadows pooling in every corner. Rats scattered as they passed. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs, but his hands were steady. This was what he did. This was who he was. A United States Marshal sworn to protect the innocent. The room was in the back, just as the informant had said. A heavy padlock secured the door. Daniel broke it with a single swing of his rifle butt, the metal shrieking as it gave way. The door swung open and Ethan's breath caught in his throat. 6 children huddled against the far wall, filthy and terrified. They were dressed in rags, their faces hollow with hunger and fear. When the light from Daniel's lantern touched them, they shrank back, too frightened even to cry out. And then one of them looked up, and Ethan's world stopped. "Uncle Ethan." The voice was small, barely more than a whisper, but Ethan would have recognized it anywhere. Emma Hayes, 11 years old, with blonde hair matted with dirt and blue eyes that had once sparkled with life but now held only desperation. Ethan dropped to his knees, making himself small, trying not to frighten her more. Emma. Oh God, Emma. She was the daughter of Jonathan Hayes, Ethan's partner before Daniel. Jonathan had died 2 years ago, taking a bullet meant for Ethan during a raid on a counterfeit ring. With his dying breath, he had made Ethan promise. Take care of Emma. Protect her like she's your own. And Ethan had tried. He had checked on her and her mother regularly, made sure they had enough money, enough food. But 3 weeks ago, Emma had vanished on her way home from school. The Chicago police had investigated, found nothing. Ethan had pulled every string, he had called in every favor, and finally gotten a tip about this warehouse. "I knew you'd come," Emma whispered, reaching out to touch his hand. Her fingers were ice cold. "I knew you'd find me." "I'm here now," Ethan said, his voice thick. "I'm going to get you out. All of you." He looked at the other 5 children, 2 boys, 3 girls, all of them too young to be in this place, too innocent to deserve this nightmare. Behind him, Daniel was already moving, ushering the children toward the door. "We need to move fast," Daniel said, "before whoever's running this operation comes back." But then Daniel's hand was on Ethan's arm, pulling him aside. "We have a problem." "What problem?" "We found them. We get them out." Daniel's face was grim in the lantern light. "I just got word from Marshal Blake. This warehouse is connected to Senator William Bradford. The trafficking ring runs straight to him. Blake says we need federal authorization before we move these kids. If we act without clearance, Bradford's lawyers will claim we violated procedure. The whole case could collapse." Ethan stared at him. "These children don't have time for procedure. It's not our call. Blake's orders are clear. We secure the location, wait for backup, 72 hours maximum." 72 hours? They've been here for weeks already. "I know. But if we move them now without authorization, Bradford walks, and he keeps trafficking children. We take him down properly. We save hundreds of kids. Not just these 6. Ethan looked back at Emma. She was watching him with those blue eyes, so much trust in her face. She believed in him. She believed he would save her. 3 days, Ethan said quietly. "I'll come back in 3 days, Emma. I promise." Emma's face crumpled. "Don't leave me here, Uncle Ethan. Please." "I won't. I promise. 3 days." The words felt like ash in his mouth even as he spoke them. He wanted to grab Emma to carry her out of this place, to hell with procedure and authorization and Senator Bradford. But he had been a marshal for 12 years. He had been trained to follow the chain of command, to trust the system. The law was supposed to protect people. That was the whole point. So he stood and he walked out of that warehouse and he left Emma Hayes behind. 72 hours later, the warehouse burned. It happened at 3 in the morning on December 17th. A fire that started in the basement and spread with unnatural speed as if accelerated by something. By the time the fire department arrived, the building was an inferno, flames reaching 60 feet into the winter sky, heat so intense it melted the snow in a 100-yard radius. Ethan was there when they brought out the bodies. 6 small forms burned beyond recognition. The medical examiner said they had died from smoke inhalation before the flames reached them. A mercy, he called it. Ethan wanted to put his fist through the man's face. They identified Emma by a yellow ribbon she had been clutching. It was silk, a gift from her mother before the woman had died of pneumonia the previous year. The ribbon had survived the fire, protected somehow by Emma's grip. Ethan took it from the examiner's hand and stood there in the snow, holding the only thing left of the girl he had promised to protect. The investigation that followed was swift and brutal. Marshal Supervisor Warren Blake had indeed received orders to delay, but those orders had come from someone high up in the federal chain. Senator Bradford was questioned, denied everything, and his lawyers made it clear that any further inquiry would be met with the full weight of Bradford's political power. There was talk of a payoff of Blake receiving $5,000 to ensure the warehouse wasn't raided too quickly. But there was no proof. Blake was quietly transferred to a desk job in Montana. Bradford went back to Washington, and 6 children remained dead. Ethan resigned his commission the next day. He didn't go to Emma's funeral. He couldn't face her grave, couldn't face the mother of the other children, couldn't face himself. Instead, he rode west, the yellow ribbon in his pocket, looking for a place where the law's failure wouldn't follow him. He found this mountain, 10,000 feet above sea level, far from any town, far from any people. He built a cabin with his own hands, cut timber from the surrounding forest, chinked the walls with mud and moss. He lived on what he could hunt and trap, made the occasional trip down to Covenant Ridge to trade furs for supplies. He spoke to almost no one. The solitude suited him, or so he told himself. For 2 years it almost worked. The present intruded on the memory. Samuel was watching him with wide eyes, Tommy with a look of understanding that came from knowing a man for 40 years. "You blamed yourself," Samuel said softly. "I did. I do. Emma trusted me, and I chose procedure over action. I chose the system over the person right in front of me. But you were following orders." "I was. And that's what made it worse. I knew it was wrong. Standing in that warehouse looking at Emma's face, every instinct I had screamed at me to get her out. But I listened to the rules instead of my conscience." Ethan closed his fist around the ribbon, feeling the silk soft against his palm. "For 2 years I lived on this mountain and told myself I was done with people, done with the law, done with trying to save anyone. And then in the summer of 1878, I looked through a window and saw her. July 23, 1878, Colorado Territory. The summer morning broke cold and clear at 10,000 feet, frost still clinging to the grass despite it being late July. Ethan woke before dawn as he always did and dressed in the dark. His routine had become automatic. Check the traps, tend to storm his Appaloosa horse, chop wood, exist. But today was different. Today he had to go down to Covenant Ridge. The Sacred Heart. Convent had sent word 2 weeks ago. They needed quinine. Malaria was creeping north from the lowlands, and the sisters were running low on treatment. Ethan had the medicine 20 glass vials he had acquired through trading across the Mexican border. The trip had taken him 3 weeks and cost him most of his fur pelts from the winter, but the sisters paid fairly and asked no questions about his past. It was as close to human interaction as he allowed himself. He saddled Storm in the pre-dawn darkness, loaded the saddlebags with the carefully wrapped vials, and started down the mountain. The descent took 3 hours, switchbacking through stands of lodgepole pine and blue spruce. At this altitude, even summer mornings carried a bite. His breath steamed in the air, and Storm's hooves crunched on patches of ice that formed in the shadows. As they dropped in elevation, the air grew warmer, thicker. Ethan could smell sage and juniper, now replacing the sharp scent of high-altitude pine. Around him the forest woke slowly. A Clark's nutcracker called from high in a dead tree. A mule deer doe watched them pass, her ears swiveling before she bounded away into the brush. Ethan's mind, as it often did on these long rides, drifted backward. He thought of Chicago, the noise, the smoke, the way the city had pressed in on him from all sides, full of people who wanted things, needed things, demanded things. He had been a different man there. Marshal Ethan Frost, a name spoken with respect in some quarters, with fear in others. But that man was gone now, buried somewhere between then and now. The memory came anyway, as it always did when he let his guard down. Emma's face, her trust, her death. He had carried that yellow ribbon for 2 years now, a constant reminder of what happened when good men did nothing. Covenant Ridge appeared in the valley below a cluster of buildings at the junction where the freight road met the river trail. Maybe 200 souls lived here, their lives revolving around the church, the general store, and the saloon. Ethan could see the white church steeple from here, and beside it, set back in a grove of cottonwoods, Sacred Heart Convent. He avoided the main street, riding instead along the back paths to the convent's side entrance. A young novice came to take Storm's reins, and Ethan nodded his thanks but said nothing. He had learned that silence discouraged conversation, and conversation led to questions he had no desire to answer. He walked to the back door and knocked twice. Mother Superior. Ruth answered. She was 61 years old, small and bent, with a face lined by decades of hard work and harder choices. When she saw Ethan, something flickered in her eyes. Relief, maybe, or fear. Mr. Frost. Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper. Thank you for coming. Ethan handed her the leather pouch containing the vials. 20 vials, same as last time. $8 each. She took the pouch with trembling hands. Up close, Ethan could see that her eyes were red-rimmed, swollen. She had been crying. Sister, are you all right? I am fine. The words came too quickly. It is nothing, just the fatigue of age. Ethan did not believe her, but he did not press. He had learned long ago that people kept secrets for their own reasons, and most of those reasons were none of his business. He turned to go, but something made him pause. A sound, faint, barely audible over the rustle of wind in the cottonwoods. It was coming from the side of the building, from a small window set high in the stone wall. A woman's voice, low, ragged, desperate. Please, God, please let me die. Ethan stopped walking. His hand moved instinctively to the Colt at his hip, though he did not draw it. He looked at Mother Ruth, and she would not meet his eyes. What was that? Nothing, Mr. Frost. You should go. But Ethan was already moving toward the sound. His boots made no noise on the grass. He reached the window and looked in. What he saw would change everything. The room was small and dim, lit only by a single narrow window on the opposite wall. In the center stood a wooden table, low and heavy, scarred by years of use. And beside the table on her knees was a young woman. She wore the gray habit of a novice nun, but it had been pulled down to her waist, exposing her back. Ethan's breath caught. Her back was a map of suffering. Old scars, white and raised, crisscrossed the pale skin. New welts, angry and red, lay over the old ones. Her wrists were bound with thick hemp rope to the legs of the table, the fibers biting into her flesh hard enough to draw blood. Her head hung forward, dark hair matted with sweat. She was shaking either from pain or cold, or both. As Ethan watched frozen, she lifted her head slightly and whispered again, Please, God, if you are there, send someone, anyone. Behind her in the shadows stood a man in black, Father Benedict Cross. Ethan had seen him before from a distance. Tall, thin, silver-haired, the kind of man who moved through the world with the absolute certainty that he spoke for God. In his hand was a bullwhip leather, braided tight and dark with old stains that might have been oil or might have been blood. You must learn, Father Benedict said, his voice devoid of emotion, that doubt is sin and sin must be purged. This is for your soul, Sister Helena. Do you understand? The woman. Sister Helena did not answer. She had no strength left to answer. Ethan's vision narrowed. His heart, which had been beating slow and steady, began to pound. His hands clenched into fists. And then Sister Helena lifted her head one more time, and her eyes met his through the window. For a moment, neither of them moved. She stared at him, and he stared back. Her eyes were gray, he saw now. Gray and filled with something far worse than pain. They were filled with resignation, with the absolute certainty that no help would come. Her lips moved. The words were barely a whisper, but Ethan heard them as clearly as if she had shouted. "If you are going to do something, please don't. I'm not worth it. But if you're just going to watch, then please go." The words hit him like a physical blow, because he had heard them before, 2 years ago in a different voice from a different girl. Emma Hayes had said almost the same thing the night before she died when Ethan had visited the warehouse one last time to tell her he would come back soon, that she just had to wait a little longer. Ethan stepped back from the window. His legs felt weak. His hands shook. He turned and walked quickly toward Storm. His mind was a chaos of images and sounds and memories he had spent 2 years trying to bury. Mother Ruth was gone. The back door was closed. Ethan mounted Storm and rode out of the convent yard without looking back. He took the river trail at a gallop, putting distance between himself and that window, that room, that girl with the gray eyes. But the image followed him. The scars, the rope, the resignation in her face. He was halfway back to the mountain before he finally pulled Storm to a halt. They stood in the middle of the trail, the horse breathing hard, the man staring at nothing. Ethan reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. He unfolded it carefully. Inside was the yellow ribbon faded by time and handling. Emma's ribbon. He had carried it for 2 years, a reminder, a penance. He looked at the ribbon, then looked back the way he had come toward the convent, toward Sister Helena. "I walked away from Emma," he said aloud, though there was no one to hear him but the horse and the wind. "And she died." Storm shifted beneath him, waiting. Ethan closed his fist around the ribbon. Not this time. He turned Storm around and rode hard toward Covenant Ridge. The town had one sheriff, one jail, and one saloon that served as the unofficial center of civic life. Ethan rode straight past all three, heading instead for the small building at the north end of the main street. A wooden sign hung above the door. Sheriff Daniel Morgan. Ethan tied Storm to the hitching post and pushed through the door without knocking. Daniel Morgan looked up from a stack of papers, his face registering surprise, then concern. He was 43 now, 2 years younger than Ethan, with gray streaking his dark hair and lines carved deep around his eyes. They had been partners once back in the days when both of them wore federal badges, when both of them believed in the law. "Ethan." Daniel stood setting down his pen. "How long has it been? 3 years?" "Longer." Ethan's voice was flat. "I need to report a crime." Daniel's expression shifted. He gestured toward a chair. "Sit down. Tell me." Ethan remained standing. "I saw a woman being tortured at Sacred Heart Convent. A nun, young. Her back was covered in scars. She was tied to a table. Father Benedict was standing over her with a whip." The words came out clipped, factual. Ethan had learned long ago that emotion did not help in situations like this. Facts did. Daniel listened without interrupting. When Ethan finished, he sank back into his own chair and rubbed his face with both hands. "God above," he muttered. "Are you certain about what you saw? Do you think I would ride down here if I wasn't?" "No." Daniel looked up. "No, you wouldn't. But Ethan, this is complicated. You're talking about Father Benedict Cross. He's the head priest at Sacred Heart. He's connected to powerful people. His brother Owen owns half the land in this valley. I don't care who he's connected to. You should. Because if we go after him without ironclad evidence, he'll bury us, and that girl will disappear." Ethan's jaw tightened. "So what do? We need proof. Medical testimony, eyewitness statements, and we need her to testify." "She's too afraid to testify. I saw it in her eyes." "Then we find other witnesses, people who work at the convent, people who have seen something but have been too scared to come forward." Before Ethan could respond, the door opened behind him. A younger man stepped in, tall and handsome with blond hair and a badge pinned to his vest. Deputy Kyle Reed. Ethan had seen him around town but never spoken to him. Kyle looked from Daniel to Ethan, his expression carefully neutral. "Sheriff, I heard voices. Is there a problem?" Daniel hesitated. And in that hesitation Ethan saw something shift, a calculation, a decision being made about who to trust. "No problem, Kyle. Mr. Frost was just leaving." Kyle smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Mr. Frost, the hermit from the mountain. I've heard about you." Ethan studied him. The deputy wore a gold chain around his neck, visible above his collar, an expensive piece for a man on a lawman's salary. And when Kyle shifted his weight, Ethan caught a glimpse of a ring on his right hand. A signet ring engraved with the initials B.C. Benedict Cross. Ethan's eyes met Daniel's, and he saw that the sheriff had noticed too. "I'll be going now," Ethan said quietly. He nodded to Daniel. "Thank you for your time, Sheriff." He walked out before Kyle could say anything else. Outside, he stood beside Storm for a long moment, thinking. Then he swung into the saddle and rode not toward the mountain, but toward the far end of town, where a small clapboard house sat behind a white picket fence. Dr. Abigail Price answered his knock almost immediately. She was 37 years old, handsome rather than pretty, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun and sharp, intelligent eyes. She had been one of the first female physicians in Colorado Territory, and she had fought for every inch of respect she now commanded. "Mr. Frost." She did not seem surprised to see him. "Come in." Inside her home smelled of carbolic acid and dried herbs. Medical texts lined the shelves, and a skeleton hung in the corner, its bones yellowed with age. Ethan removed his hat and stood awkwardly in the center of the room. "I need your help, Doctor." "I assumed as much. You don't strike me as a man who makes social calls." She gestured toward a chair. "Sit. Talk." Ethan told her everything: the window, Sister Helena, the scars, the rope. When he finished, Abigail sat in silence for a long moment, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. "I've heard rumors," she said finally, "about the convent, about Father Benedict. Nothing concrete, but enough to make me uneasy. Will you examine her if I can get her out of there?" "Yes." The answer came without hesitation. "But you need to understand what you're asking. If I write a medical report documenting abuse, it will destroy that man's reputation. It will tear this town apart, and people will fight back." "I know." She looked at him, really looked at him. And Ethan had the sense she was seeing past the weathered face and the mountain man exterior to something deeper. "Why are you doing this? You don't know this woman." Ethan thought of Emma Hayes, of the yellow ribbon in his saddlebag of 2 years spent trying to forget and failing every single night. "Because I didn't do it before," he said quietly. "And I should have." Abigail nodded slowly. "Then I'll help you." The sun was beginning to set by the time Ethan made his third and final stop. The Protestant church stood at the opposite end of town from Sacred Heart, smaller and plainer, built of rough-hewn logs rather than stone. Reverend Nathan Shepherd was in the cemetery behind the church tending to the graves. He was 51 years old, tall and gaunt, with a thick black beard streaked with gray. When he saw Ethan approaching, he set down his shears and waited. "Mr. Frost, this is unexpected." Ethan stopped a few feet away. "I need to ask you about Sacred Heart Convent, about Father Benedict." Something flickered in Nathan's eyes. Anger, perhaps, or pain. "What do you want to know?" "The truth." Nathan looked down at the grave he had been tending. The headstone read, "Sister Mary Porter, 1873 to 1876. Died at 20 years old." 3 years ago," Nathan said quietly, "I stood before the town council and accused Father Benedict of abusing the women in his care. I said that God does not call us to torture one another in His name. I said that what was happening at Sacred Heart was a sin against heaven. What did they say? They said I was jealous, that I was trying to turn people away from the true church, that I was a heretic and a liar. Nathan's voice was steady, but his hands clenched. "Father Benedict sued me for slander. I lost everything, my reputation, my congregation. If not for a few faithful families, I would have lost this church too. But you were right. Being right doesn't matter if no one believes you." Nathan looked up. "Why are you asking me this now?" Ethan told him. And when he was done, Nathan Shepherd closed his eyes and took a long, shaking breath. "Sister Mary," he said, "the girl buried here. She came to me 6 months before she died. She was terrified. She said Father Benedict was punishing her for sins she didn't commit. She begged me to help her." "What did you do?" "I went to the bishop. I wrote letters. I made noise." Nathan opened his eyes. "And 2 weeks later, Sister Mary was found dead. They said it was an accident, a fall down the stairs." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "But I saw her body before they buried her. She had bruises on her wrists, like rope burns." The two men stood in the fading light surrounded by graves. "If you testify," Ethan said, "they'll come after you again." "Let them." Nathan's voice was hard. "This time I won't back down." Ethan rode back to Daniel's office as darkness fell over Covenant Ridge. The sheriff was alone now, the lamp on his desk casting long shadows across the walls. "I have 3 witnesses," Ethan said without preamble. "Dr. Price will examine Sister Helena and write a medical report. Reverend Shepherd will testify about Sister Mary. And I'll testify about what I saw today." Daniel looked tired, older than his 43 years. "It's still not enough, Ethan. We need a warrant to search the convent, and for that we need a judge to sign off. Judge Harrison here in town will never do it. He and Father Benedict play cards every Thursday." "Then we go to another judge." "The nearest one willing to cross Father Benedict is Judge Eleanor Hayes in Boulder, 50 miles from here, and it's already dark." Ethan met his old partner's eyes. "Then we ride through the night." For a long moment Daniel did not move. Then he stood, reached for his coat, and pulled his own Winchester from the rack. "Reverend Shepherd has a wagon. We'll need him to come with us. 3 men carry more weight than 2. They rode out of Covenant Ridge an hour later, just the 3 of them. Ethan on Storm Daniel on his own gelding, Nathan driving a small wagon pulled by a pair of draft horses. The night was cold and clear, the stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. No one spoke much. They saved their breath for the road which climbed steadily into the high country following a trail that switchbacked up the slopes of Arapahoe Pass. At this altitude, even in summer, the air carried a bite. Their breath steamed in the moonlight. But someone was watching them leave. Deputy Kyle Reed sat in the window of the sheriff's office and saw them go. Then he stood, pulled on his coat, and walked quickly toward Sacred Heart Convent. At the convent, Father Benedict was preparing for bed when he heard the knock. He opened the door to find Kyle standing in the shadows, breathing hard. "They're going to Boulder," Kyle said without preamble. "The sheriff, that mountain man, and the Protestant minister. They're going to see Judge Hayes." Father Benedict's face did not change, but his eyes went cold and flat. "When?" "They left an hour ago. They'll be there by dawn." Father Benedict nodded slowly. "Then we move Sister Helena tonight. Wake Mother Ruth. Tell her to prepare the girl for transport. We're taking her to St. Helena Asylum in Denver." "What about the mountain man?" "Let him get his warrant. By the time they return, Sister Helena will be gone, and without her they have nothing." Kyle hesitated. "Father, if we're caught moving her—" "We won't be caught." Father Benedict's voice was soft, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. "Go now." In the dormitory wing of the convent, Sister Helena lay on a narrow cot, too exhausted to sleep. Her back throbbed with every breath. The ropes had left deep marks on her wrists, and her shoulders ached from being held in the same position for hours. She stared at the ceiling and thought about the man she had seen through the window. The mountain man with the weathered face and the haunted eyes. For just a moment, when their gazes met, she had felt something she had not felt in 8 years. Hope. But hope was a dangerous thing. Hope led to disappointment. Hope led to more pain. She closed her eyes and prayed not to be saved, but to be strong enough to endure whatever came next. Ethan, Daniel, and Nathan reached Boulder just as the first light of dawn touched the peaks. They had ridden through the night without stopping their horses, lathered and blowing hard. Judge Eleanor Hayes's house stood at the edge of town, a solid 2-story structure built of stone and timber. Ethan dismounted and knocked on the door. There was no answer. He knocked again, louder this time. Finally, a light appeared in an upstairs window. A moment later, the door opened to reveal Judge Hayes herself, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, holding a shotgun. "This had better be good," she said. It took an hour to explain everything. Judge Hayes listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a pad of paper. When they finished, she set down her pen and looked at each of them in turn. "Mr. Frost, I'm going to ask you one question, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. Are you absolutely certain about what you saw?" Ethan thought of Sister Helena, of her gray eyes, of the resignation in her face. He thought of Emma Hayes, of a promise broken, of 2 years spent hiding from his own failure. "I'm certain, Your Honor." Judge Hayes nodded. She turned to a cabinet, pulled out an official form, and began to fill it in with quick, precise strokes. When she was done, she signed her name at the bottom and pressed her seal into the wax. "This warrant authorizes you to search Sacred Heart Convent, interview witnesses, and remove Sister Helena Ward into protective custody pending a full investigation. It's valid for 72 hours. She looked at them over the rim of her spectacles. "If Father Benedict is innocent, he'll be cleared. If he's guilty, may God have mercy on his soul." They rode back toward Covenant Ridge as fast as their tired horses could manage. But they were still 5 miles out when they met a farmer heading to market. "Sheriff," the farmer called out, "you looking for that nun?" Daniel reined in. "What nun?" "The one from Sacred Heart. Saw Father Benedict and that deputy of yours loading a girl into a wagon around midnight, headed toward Denver." Ethan felt his blood turn to ice. He looked at Daniel, and the sheriff's face had gone pale. "They took her," Daniel said. "God above, they took her." Ethan turned Storm toward the mountains. "I know where they're going. There's only one road to Denver from here, but there's a shortcut, Eagle's Pass." Daniel's eyes widened. "Ethan, no. That trail is barely wide enough for a horse. One slip and you fall 900 feet. Even in daylight it's dangerous." "I rode it once before. 13 years ago, when I was still a marshal. We were tracking a fugitive who knew the territory. My partner said it was suicide, but I made it through." Ethan's jaw set. "Storm can handle it, and it cuts 2 hours off the journey to the Denver road. 2 hours might not matter if you're dead at the bottom of a canyon, and 2 hours might be all Helena has." Ethan spurred Storm into a gallop and disappeared into the trees, leaving Daniel and Nathan staring after him. The trail to Eagle's Pass was everything Daniel had warned, and worse. It climbed steeply through thick forest, then emerged onto a narrow ridge of exposed rock. On one side was the mountain. On the other was a drop of 900 feet straight down into a boulder-strewn gorge. Storm picked his way carefully, ears flat against his head. Ethan leaned forward in the saddle, trying to keep his weight centered, trying not to think about what would happen if the horse stumbled. The wind up here was fierce, tearing at his clothes and bringing tears to his eyes. Below he could see the river road, a thin brown line winding through the valley. Somewhere on that road was a wagon carrying Sister Helena toward a place from which she might never return. Ethan pushed Storm harder than he should have. The horse responded, trusting him, even though every instinct must have been screaming to slow down, to be careful. Loose rocks skittered away beneath Storm's hooves, bouncing down the cliff face. Ethan didn't watch them fall. He kept his eyes forward, focused on the trail ahead. At one point the path narrowed to less than 4 feet wide. Storm hesitated, nostrils flaring. Ethan touched the horse's neck, feeling the warmth beneath the spotted coat. "Come on, old friend. We've been through worse." They hadn't, actually, but Storm trusted him, and that was enough. The horse moved forward, each step deliberate and measured. The wind howled, the cliff yawned, and somehow, impossibly, they made it across. They descended the far side in an hour and a half, shaving precious minutes off the journey. And there at the bottom, beside a creek where the road from Covenant Ridge met the Denver highway, Ethan saw it. A wagon stopped to water the horses. Father Benedict stood beside the team. Kyle Reed sat in the driver's seat. And in the back, barely visible beneath a canvas tarp, was a small figure that could only be Sister Helena. Ethan dismounted 100 yards away and tied Storm to a tree. Then he pulled his Winchester from its scabbard, checked the action one more time, and walked into the clearing. Father Benedict saw him first. The priest's face registered surprise, then calculation, then a cold, controlled fury. "Mr. Frost, you're persistent. I'll give you that." Ethan stopped 20 feet away, the rifle held loosely in his hands. "Step away from the wagon." "Or what?" "You'll shoot a priest." "If I have to." Kyle Reed's hand moved toward his sidearm, but Ethan swung the Winchester toward him. "Don't." The deputy froze. From the back of the wagon came a sound, a whimper, then a voice weak but unmistakable. You came back." Sister Helena pulled herself upright, her hands still bound, her face pale. Beside her sat another figure in gray. Sister Ann Fletcher, barely 20 years old, her face streaked with tears. She had been silent during the entire journey, but now she looked at Helena, then at Ethan, then at Father Benedict, and something in her young face changed. "Sister Ann," Father Benedict said sharply, sensing danger, "sit down." But Ann was already moving. Her hands, which had been folded in her lap in the posture of obedience she had been taught since childhood, reached for the rope binding Helena's wrists. Her fingers trembled, but they did not stop. "Sister Ann, I command you to stop." Ann's voice was small but clear. "No, Father, I will not." She worked at the knots, and Helena stared at her with wonder. "Ann, they'll punish you for this. Let them." Ann's tears fell faster now, but her hands kept working. "I should have done this years ago, when I first saw what he was doing to you. When Sister Mary died, when my own sister Claire disappeared. I told myself it wasn't my place, that I was too young, too scared. But I was wrong. I've been wrong for so long." The rope came free, and Helena's hands dropped to her lap, marked with deep grooves where the hemp had cut into her flesh. Ann helped her climb down from the wagon, supporting her weight when Helena's legs threatened to give out. The young nun looked up at Ethan, her face filled with a mixture of fear and desperate courage. "Please, sir, please don't let him take us back." Father Benedict lunged forward, but Ethan swung the Winchester toward him. "Stay where you are." Behind them, the sound of hoofbeats. Daniel and Nathan rode into the clearing, followed by Dr. Abigail in her buggy. They had caught up at last. Daniel dismounted, one hand on his own weapon. "Father Benedict, Deputy Reed, you're both under arrest for kidnapping and obstruction of justice." For a moment, no one moved. The only sound was the creak and the wind in the aspens. Then Kyle Reed made his choice. His hand moved slowly toward the revolver at his hip. Ethan's finger found the trigger of his Winchester. Time seemed to slow. He saw the deputy's fingers tighten, saw the barrel begin to rise, and his body moved before his mind fully processed the threat. He swung the rifle up and fired. The shot was deafening in the morning quiet. Kyle jerked backward, the gun flying from his hand. He clutched his right shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers, his face twisted in shock and pain. Father Benedict lunged toward the wagon, toward Sister Helena, but Daniel was faster. The sheriff grabbed the priest by the arm and spun him around, slamming him face first against the side of the wagon. "Don't move." Nathan had already jumped down from his horse and was pulling Helena from danger. She collapsed into his arms, her legs too weak to hold her weight. Dr. Abigail rushed over, medical bag in hand, and began checking Helena's vital signs, even as Nathan carried her to the shade of a nearby cottonwood. Ethan kept his rifle trained on Kyle, who had sunk to his knees, still clutching his shoulder. The deputy's face had gone white. The bullet had gone through clean, missing bone and major vessels, but the wound was bleeding freely. "You shot me," Kyle said, his voice thick with disbelief. "You shot a lawman." "You drew first." Ethan's voice was flat. "And you stopped being a lawman the moment you chose to protect a criminal instead of the law." Daniel produced a pair of iron manacles and secured Father Benedict's wrists behind his back. The priest did not struggle, but his eyes burned with cold rage. "This is persecution," Benedict said. "You're attacking the church itself. The bishop will hear of this. Senator Bradford will hear of this. You're all finished. Maybe, Daniel's voice was calm, but you're under arrest. Kidnapping, false imprisonment, assault. We can add more charges later. He turned to Kyle, who was swaying slightly, his eyes unfocused. Kyle, I'm placing you under arrest as well. Conspiracy, obstruction, aiding and abetting. Can you stand? Kyle did not answer. His eyes rolled back and he toppled sideways into the dirt unconscious from blood loss and shock. Dr. Abigail looked up from her examination of Helena. I need to tend to the deputy before he bleeds out. Reverend, press this cloth against her back. Keep pressure on the worst of the wounds. She moved quickly to Kyle's side, cutting away his shirt to expose the bullet wound. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, cleaning, packing, bandaging. Within minutes, she had the bleeding under control, and Kyle was beginning to stir. Ethan finally lowered the Winchester and walked over to where Helena lay beneath the tree. Up close, in full daylight, the extent of her injuries was horrifying. Her back was a lattice of old scars and fresh wounds. Her wrists were rubbed raw from the ropes, some areas down to the muscle. She was dangerously thin, her cheekbones sharp beneath pale skin, but her eyes were open, and they were watching him. "Why?" she whispered. "You don't know me. Why did you come back?" Ethan knelt beside her. For a moment he did not know how to answer. How could he explain 2 years of guilt, 2 years of waking up in the night seeing Emma Hayes's face, 2 years of knowing he had failed when it mattered most? "Because I should have come back before," he said finally, "for someone else, and I didn't, and she died." Understanding flickered in Helena's eyes. "The girl, Emma." Ethan's throat tightened. "How do you know that name?" "You said it, when you were talking to the sheriff. You said her name." Helena's hand moved slowly, painfully, until her fingers touched his. "I'm sorry you lost her, but you saved me. That has to count for something." Before Ethan could respond, Dr. Abigail returned, wiping her hands on a cloth. "The deputy will live. Now let me look at you properly, child." As Abigail began a thorough examination, Ethan stood and walked back to where Daniel had secured both prisoners. Father Benedict sat with his back against the wagon wheel, his face composed, almost serene. Kyle lay in the dirt nearby, his shoulder bandaged, his face pale with pain and shock. They loaded everyone into the wagon for the journey back to Covenant Ridge. Helena lay in the bed covered with blankets, with Anne sitting beside her and Dr. Abigail monitoring her condition. Father Benedict and Kyle were shackled to the wagon sides. Daniel drove with Nathan beside him. Ethan rode Storm alongside Winchester across his saddle, watching the tree line for any sign of trouble. As they approached Covenant Ridge, the sun climbing higher in the sky, Ethan saw what he had been dreading. A crowd had gathered in the town square. 60 people, maybe more. Some carried torches even in daylight. And at the front of the crowd stood a tall, imposing man in expensive clothes. Owen Cross, Father Benedict's older brother. The wagon slowed. Daniel raised his hand, bringing them to a stop. The crowd pressed forward, angry voices rising. Owen stepped forward as they approached. He was 57 years old, with silver hair and the kind of face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He had made his fortune in land and cattle, and he wielded power in this valley the way some men wielded a knife. "Sheriff Morgan," Owen's voice carried easily in the tense air, "I understand you've arrested my brother." "That's correct, Mr. Cross. Father Benedict has been charged with multiple counts of assault, false imprisonment, and kidnapping." "On whose testimony?" Owen's eyes flicked to the wagon where Helena lay, then to Ethan. "A disgraced former marshal who ran from Chicago after children died on his watch." The words hit like hammers. Ethan felt every eye in the crowd turn toward him. He saw judgment there, saw condemnation. Owen had done his research, had prepared for this moment. "Ethan Frost," Owen continued, his voice rising, "United States Marshal, resigned December 1876 after 6 children burned alive because he waited for orders instead of saving them. One of them was Emma Hayes, daughter of his dead partner. The girl trusted him, and he let her die." The crowd murmured. Some people began to turn away. Others shook their heads. Ethan sat on Storm, exposed, his past laid bare for everyone to see. And then something happened that Ethan would remember for the rest of his life. Sister Helena Ward, despite her pain, despite her weakness, pulled herself upright in the wagon bed. She stood swaying, supported by Anne's arm, and looked out at the crowd. "His past doesn't matter," she said. Her voice was not loud, but in the sudden silence it carried to every ear. "What matters is, he didn't walk away from me." She pointed at Ethan. "When he saw me suffering, he didn't wait for permission. He didn't follow orders. He didn't ask if it was proper or legal or safe. He did what was right. That's not the action of a coward, Mr. Cross. That's the action of a man who learned from his mistakes." The crowd shifted. A few people began whispering. An elderly woman at the edge, Mrs. Patterson, took a step to the side. Then another person moved. Then another. The crowd began to part, opening a path down the middle. Daniel clicked to the horses, and the wagon rolled forward. Owen Cross stood to the side, his confident expression flickering. As Ethan rode past him, Owen leaned close and spoke so only Ethan could hear. "This isn't over, Frost. Not by half." "I know." They locked Father Benedict and Kyle in separate cells. The jail was small, just 2 cells divided by iron bars, but it would hold them until the trial. Dr. Abigail took Helena to her own home where she could provide proper medical care. Anne went with them, refusing to leave Helena's side. As the sun set on that long day, Ethan stood outside the jail, watching the last light fade from the sky. Daniel came to stand beside him. "You know what happens next," Daniel said quietly. "This is going to tear the town apart. Father Benedict has powerful friends. The church will close ranks. They'll call this an attack on religious freedom." "I know." "And you're still willing to go through with it?" Ethan thought of Helena lying in Abigail's house, finally safe. He thought of Emma, who had never gotten that chance. He thought of the yellow ribbon in his saddlebag and of the promise he had broken 2 years ago. "She trusted me when she had no reason to trust anyone," Ethan said. "I'm not going to betray that trust." Daniel nodded slowly. "Then we do this together. Like old times." "Like old times." They clasped hands once briefly, and that was enough. The night settled over Covenant Ridge, bringing with it a cold wind from the mountains. In her cell, Helena Ward slept for the first time in 8 years without fear. In the jail, Father Benedict prayed in Latin, his voice a steady murmur in the darkness. In his mansion on the hill, Owen Cross sat at his desk and began to write letters to very powerful people. And on the porch of Dr. Abigail's house, Ethan Frost sat with his Winchester across his knees, keeping watch through the long hours until dawn. He had failed once. He had let a child die because he trusted the system more than his own conscience. He would not fail again. Whatever came next, whatever price he had to pay, Sister Helena Ward would have her justice. And maybe, just maybe, Ethan Frost would finally find his redemption. The trial was set to begin in 7 days. The week that followed the arrest moved with the strange quality of a dream, events unfolding with an inevitability that felt both terrifying and necessary. Ethan spent his days helping Daniel gather evidence, his nights keeping watch over Dr. Abigail's house where Helena recovered. He slept in 2-hour increments, the Winchester always within reach. Storm saddled and ready in the stable behind the house. Owen Cross had not made another public appearance since that day in the square, but his presence was felt everywhere. Men in expensive suits arrived from Denver, staying at the town's only hotel, asking careful questions. Twice Daniel found strangers watching the jail from across the street. Once someone tried to set a fire in the alley behind Dr. Abigail's house. Ethan had been waiting in the shadows. The arsonist ran when he saw the rifle barrel pointed at his chest. On the 3rd day after the arrest, Daniel came to Ethan with news. "I got a telegram from Judge Hayes. The trial starts in 4 days. She's coming here herself to preside. Says this case is too important to leave to local jurisdiction." They were sitting in the sheriff's office, the afternoon sun slanting through the dusty windows. Daniel looked exhausted, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. "How's the witness list?" Ethan asked. "Growing. Sarah Mitchell came forward yesterday. She's a school teacher, works at the building next to the convent. Says she saw Father Benedict beating Helena through a window 6 months ago. Didn't report it because she was afraid of losing her position. Will she testify?" "She will now. After what you did at the creek after Helena stood up in that wagon, people are finding their courage." Daniel paused. "Mother Ruth came to see me this morning." Ethan looked up sharply. "The Mother Superior. She wants to confess. Says she's known about the abuse for 8 years. Heard Helena screaming every Wednesday night. The chapel of penance was directly below her room." Daniel's voice was heavy. "She did nothing. Just prayed it would stop." "Why come forward now?" "Because she can't live with it anymore. She said when she saw Helena in that wagon, saw the rope burns on her wrists, she realized she'd been complicit in torture. She wants to testify, even though it means losing everything." Ethan stood and walked to the window. Outside Covenant Ridge went about its business. A woman swept the boardwalk in front of the general store. 2 men loaded lumber onto a wagon. Children played in the dusty street. Normal life continuing despite the storm building at its center. "What about the other one?" Ethan asked. "Sister Ann. She's with Helena constantly. Dr. Abigail says Ann won't leave her side even to sleep. Keeps apologizing, keeps saying she should have spoken up sooner." Daniel shuffled through papers on his desk. "Ann told me something interesting. Her older sister was at Sacred Heart 5 years ago. Sister Joan Fletcher. Father Benedict sent her to an asylum in Philadelphia for what he called special treatment. The family never saw her again. Is she still alive? We're trying to find out. Sent telegrams to every asylum in Pennsylvania. No responses yet." Daniel looked up. "But Ann will testify about what she saw. Mary's death, Claire's disappearance, and what Father Benedict did to Helena. That gives us 4 witnesses, 5 if we count me." "6? A woman's voice came from the doorway. Dr. Abigail Price stepped into the office, her medical bag in one hand. Behind her, moving slowly but under her own power, was Helena Ward. Ethan stood so quickly, his chair scraped against the floor. Helena looked better than she had at the creek. Some color returned to her face, but she still moved with the careful deliberation of someone in constant pain. She wore a simple dress that Dr. Abigail had provided, dark blue cotton that covered her arms and neck. Her dark hair was pulled back, exposing a face that was younger than Ethan had realized. 24 years old, but her eyes held the weariness of someone much older. "Miss Ward," Daniel said, standing as well, "you shouldn't be out of bed." "I've been in bed for 3 days." Helena's voice was stronger now, though still soft. "I came to tell you I'll testify. At the trial. I'll tell them everything." "Helena, you don't have to," Abigail said gently. "We have enough witnesses. You could stay out of it. Let the others speak." "No." Helena looked at each of them in turn, her gray eyes steady. "Everyone else saw pieces, heard things, suspected. Only I know the full truth of what happened in that room. If I stay silent now, then all those years, all that pain, it was for nothing." She turned to Ethan. "You stood up for me when you had every reason to walk away. The least I can do is stand up for myself." Ethan wanted to tell her she was brave, wanted to say something that would match the weight of what she was offering. But the words caught in his throat, so he simply nodded. Helena swayed slightly, and Abigail immediately took her arm. "That's enough for today. Back to the house. You need rest." As they turned to leave, Helena paused. "Mr. Frost, thank you for coming back." Then she was gone, Abigail supporting her as they walked carefully down the street. Daniel watched them go, then turned to Ethan. "That woman has more courage than half the men in this town." "She does. Which is why we can't let her down. We need to make this case airtight. No mistakes, no gaps." Daniel pulled out a folder. "I've been going through Father Benedict's history. He came here from Ohio 5 years ago. Before that he was in Pennsylvania. Letters of recommendation from bishops, parish priests, all speaking of his dedication to spiritual discipline." "Spiritual discipline." Ethan's voice was flat. That's what they call it. Apparently. I sent telegrams to the dioceses where he served. Asked about any complaints, any investigations. Got one response so far. Daniel pulled out a sheet of paper. From a priest in Pittsburgh, Father Michael O'Connor. He says 3 young women left Father Benedict's care under mysterious circumstances between 1864 and 1873. One died of fever. One was sent to an asylum. One returned to her family but never spoke of what happened. 3 victims in Pennsylvania. How many in Ohio? Still waiting on responses, but if the pattern holds, probably 3 or 4 more, which means by the time he got to Colorado, Father Benedict had been doing this for over a decade. Ethan felt something cold settle in his stomach. This wasn't a man who had made a mistake, who had gone too far once in misguided zeal. This was a predator who had perfected his methods over years, moving from place to place, protected by the church, leaving broken women in his wake. "We need to find proof," Ethan said. "Letters, records, something that connects all the victims." "I've been thinking the same thing. Kyle Reed said something before he passed out at the creek, something about a ledger." "A ledger?" He was delirious from blood loss, but he kept saying, "Father Benedict has a ledger. It's all in the ledger." I thought he was rambling, but what if he wasn't? What if Father Benedict kept records? Ethan looked at Daniel. "You want to search the rectory?" "I have a warrant for the convent. Judge Hayes was very specific. We can search any building on the Sacred Heart property. The rectory is on that property." "When?" "Tonight, after dark. Fewer witnesses, less chance of interference from Owen Cross." That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Ethan and Daniel walked to Sacred Heart Convent. Nathan Shepard came with them, along with 2 deputies Daniel had sworn in that afternoon. Men he trusted, men who had no connection to the Cross family. The rectory was a small building attached to the main convent structure, Father Benedict's private quarters. Mother Ruth met them at the door, her face pale but resolute. "The room is as he left it," she said. "I've forbidden anyone to enter." She led them through a narrow hallway to a heavy wooden door. Inside, the space was Spartan. A bed, a desk, a bookshelf lined with religious texts, a crucifix on the wall, everything neat, orderly, the room of a man who valued discipline and control. Daniel began with the desk. Ethan took the bookshelf. Nathan checked the bed and the small closet. They worked methodically, carefully searching for anything that might be hidden. It was Nathan who found it. "Here," he said, his voice tight. "East wall, behind the books." He had pulled several volumes from the middle shelf, revealing the wall behind. At first glance it looked solid, but when Nathan pressed on a particular spot, a section of wood paneling swung inward on hidden hinges. Behind the false wall was a small cavity, and inside that cavity was a leather-bound book, perhaps 10 inches tall and 6 inches wide, the cover darkened with age and handling. Daniel lifted it out carefully as if it might break. He set it on the desk and opened to the first page. What they found inside would change everything. The ledger was meticulous. 14 names spanning 15 years from 1864 to 1878. Each entry included a name, an age, a date of arrival, and detailed notes written in a cramped, precise hand. Sister Margaret Doyle, age 19. Pennsylvania, 1864. Progress in purification, 40%. Relocated after 12 months. Sister Ruth Connolly, age 22. Pennsylvania, 1865. Progress in purification, 65%. Deceased fever after 18 months. Sister Catherine Mills, age 20. Pennsylvania, 1866. Progress in purification, 30%. Transferred to asylum after 9 months. The list continued. Pennsylvania, Ohio, and finally Colorado. Sister Mary Porter, age 20. Colorado, 1875. Progress in purification, 80%. Deceased accidental fall after 16 months. Sister Claire Morrison, age 21. Colorado, 1876. Progress in purification, 50%. Relocated after 14 months. Sister Helena Ward, age 22. Colorado, 1874. Progress in purification, 75%. In progress. Beside each name were notations, dates and descriptions of what Father Benedict called purification sessions, the number of lashes administered, hours spent in isolation, days without food, all recorded with the clinical detachment of a scientist documenting an experiment. And beside each notation was a percentage Father Benedict's assessment of how effectively the punishment had purged the sin from each woman's soul. Daniel's hands shook as he turned the pages. Sweet mercy, he's been doing this for 14 years. He kept records, Nathan said, his voice hollow, of torture, like it was holy work. Ethan stared at the page listing Helena's name, 75% purified, as if a human soul could be quantified, as if suffering could be measured and catalogued and used as proof of spiritual progress. This is our evidence, Daniel said. This is what we need. A written record in his own hand documenting 14 victims across 3 states. Will it be enough? Ethan asked. It has to be, because this proves it wasn't just Helena. It proves a pattern, a system. This man is a predator who used his position in the church to abuse women for over a decade. They carefully wrapped the ledger and locked it in the sheriff's safe. That night, Ethan sat on the porch of Dr. Abigail's house and thought about the 14 names in that book. 14 women. How many had survived? How many had recovered? How many, like Mary Porter, had died before they could escape? The door opened behind him. Helena stepped out, wrapped in a shawl against the evening chill. She moved slowly but steadily, her strength returning day by day. "May I sit with you?" she asked. "Of course." She settled into the chair beside him, wincing slightly as her back touched the wood. For a moment they sat in silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Anne told me you found something," Helena said, "in Father Benedict's room." "We did. A ledger. Records of everyone he's hurt over the past 15 years. "How many?" 14, that we know of." Helena closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were wet with tears. 14. 14 women who went through what I went through. Some of them didn't survive it. I know. Mary didn't. I was there when they found her body at the bottom of the stairs. She had been trying to escape. He caught her, and the next morning she was dead. Helena's voice was steady, but her hands gripped the arms of the chair. They said it was an accident, that she fell, but I saw the bruises on her wrists. Rope burns, just like mine. Ethan turned to look at her. In the fading light, her profile was sharp, her jaw set with determination. "Are you sure you want to testify?" he asked. "It will be difficult. His lawyers will try to break you down to make you seem unreliable." "I know." Helena met his eyes. "But Mr. Frost, if I don't speak, then what was it all for? 8 years of pain, 8 years of thinking I deserved it, 8 years of believing I was too sinful, too worthless to deserve anything better." Her voice grew stronger. "If I stay silent now, he wins. Even locked in a cell, he wins." "You're very brave." "No, I'm terrified." She smiled, a sad expression that didn't reach her eyes. "But you taught me something. You taught me that sometimes doing the right thing means doing the thing that scares you most." Before Ethan could respond, the sound of hoofbeats echoed down the street. A rider approached at speed, pulling up in front of the sheriff's office. Even from this distance, Ethan could see the telegraph paper in the man's hand. Daniel emerged from the office, read the telegram, and his face went pale. He looked up, searching the street, and his eyes found Ethan. Something was wrong. Ethan stood. "Stay here. Lock the door behind me." He crossed the street at a run. Daniel handed him the telegram without a word. The message was from a contact in Denver. 4 words that changed everything. Bradford coming to testify. Tomorrow. Ethan felt the world tilt. Senator William Bradford, the man connected to Emma Hayes' death, the man who had paid Marshall Blake $5,000 to delay the rescue, the man who had walked away from 6 dead children without facing any consequences. Bradford was coming to Covenant Ridge to testify on behalf of Father Benedict Cross. How? Ethan's voice was barely a whisper. How does he even know about this trial? Owen Cross. Daniel's jaw was tight. Owen must have contacted him. Bradford and Owen have done business together before, land deals in the territory. Owen's calling in favors. Bradford will testify that Father Benedict is a man of God, that any discipline administered was within religious bounds. He'll use his position as a U.S. Senator to give credibility to a torturer. And he'll do it while looking you in the eye, knowing what he did in Chicago. Daniel put his hand on Ethan's shoulder. Can you sit in that courtroom and watch him lie? Ethan thought of Emma, of the warehouse, of the yellow ribbon he still carried. For 2 years he had dreamed of the day he might face Bradford again, might make the man answer for what he had done. But not like this, not in defense of another monster. I don't have a choice, Ethan said. If I leave, if I refuse to be there, Helena loses, and I won't let that happen. Then we need to be ready. Bradford is smooth. He spent 20 years in politics, knows how to work a room, how to make people believe him. We need something that will cut through his charm. The ledger. It's not enough. Lawyers can argue the ledger is a spiritual journal, not evidence of abuse. We need something more concrete, something that ties Bradford directly to corruption. Ethan was silent for a moment, thinking. Then he remembered something, a letter written by a dying man confessing his sins. Warren Blake, Ethan said slowly. My old supervisor in Chicago, the one who took the bribe from Bradford. He died last year in Montana. I know, you told me. What I didn't tell you is that he sent me a letter before he died, a confession. He named Bradford, named the amount of the bribe, named the others who were involved in the trafficking ring. Ethan looked at Daniel. I've been carrying it for 8 months. Couldn't bring myself to read it more than once, but I kept it. Do you still have it? In my saddlebag, at Dr. Abigail's house. Get it. If Blake's confession is notarized, if it's a signed deathbed statement, it's admissible evidence. We can use it to destroy Bradford's credibility before he even opens his mouth. They worked through the night preparing. Daniel drafted questions for each witness, anticipated the defense's arguments, studied every legal precedent he could find in the town's small law library. Ethan retrieved Blake's letter, the paper yellowed and creased from months of being carried against his heart. He read it again, Blake's spidery handwriting confessing to everything. The bribe, the delay, the knowledge that children would likely die while they waited for authorization. And at the end, a list of names. Senator William Bradford, Judge Harrison of Chicago, warehouse owner Charles Mills, police captain Robert Shaw, all the men who had profited from the suffering of children. The letter was notarized, witnessed by a priest and a doctor who had attended Blake's deathbed. It was legal, it was damning, and it would destroy Bradford, but using it would also mean exposing everything. Emma's death, Ethan's failure, the whole ugly truth of Chicago laid bare for the entire town to see. Helena found him sitting on the back steps of Dr. Abigail's house near midnight, the letter in his hands. You should be resting, Ethan said. So should you. She sat beside him carefully, favoring her healing back. Is that the letter? The one about Emma? How did you know? Anne told me. She heard the sheriff talking. Helena looked at him. You're going to use it tomorrow, to stop Senator Bradford. I have to. It's the only way to prove he's corrupt, to show the jury that his testimony means nothing. But it will hurt you. Everyone will know what happened in Chicago. They'll know you waited, that you followed orders while children died. They already know. Owen Cross made sure of that. Knowing and seeing proof are different things. Helena's hand found his. Are you ready for that? Ethan looked down at their joined hands. Helena's fingers were still marked with scars from the rope, but her grip was strong. I spent 2 years hiding on a mountain because I couldn't face what I'd done, he said. I told myself I was done with people, done with trying to save anyone. But the truth is, I was just afraid. Afraid of failing again. Afraid of the guilt. He met her eyes. You asked me once why I came back. Why I didn't walk away from you like I walked away from Emma. I remember. I came back because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. And tomorrow I'll use this letter. I'll expose myself because I can't live with myself if I let Bradford help Father Benedict go free." He squeezed her hand. "You're going to stand in that courtroom and tell the truth about 8 years of hell. The least I can do is tell the truth about 3 days of cowardice." Helena was quiet for a long moment. Then she leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture of trust that made Ethan's throat tight. "We'll tell our truths together," she said softly. "And maybe that will be enough." The morning of the trial dawned gray and cold. An unseasonable chill had settled over the valley, and people arrived at the town hall wrapped in coats and shawls, despite it being late summer. Every seat filled within the first 30 minutes. Those who couldn't fit inside pressed against the windows, straining to hear. Judge Eleanor Hayes presided from behind a heavy oak table, her face stern and impassive. She was a woman in her late 50s, with iron-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She had built a reputation across Colorado territory for fairness and for refusing to be intimidated by wealth or power. Father Benedict sat at the defense table, flanked by 2 lawyers brought in from Denver. Victor Stratton was the lead counsel, a man of 42, with slicked-back hair and expensive clothes. Beside him sat Marcus Webb, younger, taking notes. Father Benedict himself looked calm, almost serene. He wore his clerical collar and black suit, his hands folded in prayer. At a separate table sat Kyle Reed and his lawyer, a local man named Thomas Grant. Kyle's arm was still in a sling, his face pale and miserable. He had tried to make bail, but Judge Hayes had denied it, citing flight risk. Daniel Morgan served as prosecutor, though he had little formal legal training. He stood at the front of the courtroom facing a sea of faces, some sympathetic, many hostile. The church had rallied behind Father Benedict, and half the town believed this trial was an attack on their faith itself. In the front row of the gallery sat Helena Ward, with Dr. Abigail on one side and Sister Anne on the other. Helena wore a simple gray dress, her dark hair pulled back. She sat straight, despite the pain it must have caused her. Back, her gray eyes fixed on Father Benedict with an expression Ethan couldn't quite read. Not hatred, not fear. Something colder. Judgment. Ethan sat 3 rows back, the Winchester leaning against his knee. He had been deputized for the day, giving him legal authority to maintain order, but really he was there because Daniel wanted someone he trusted watching his back. Judge Hayes gavelled the room to order. "This court will come to order. We are here to hear the case of the Territory of Colorado versus Benedict Cross and Kyle Reed. Mr. Morgan, you may call your first witness." The prosecution calls Sarah Mitchell. Sarah took the stand, a woman of 37 with graying brown hair and work-roughened hands. She taught at the small schoolhouse adjacent to the convent, had lived in Covenant Ridge her entire life. Her voice shook as she swore the oath. Daniel approached gently. "Miss Mitchell, please tell the court what you witnessed on the night of February 14th of this year." Sarah took a breath. "I was working late at the schoolhouse grading papers. It was past 9 in the evening. I heard a sound from next door from the convent. A scream." She paused. "I went to the window and looked out. I could see into one of the convent rooms. The chapel of penance, I learned later." "What did you see?" "I saw Sister Helena tied to a table. Her back was bare. Father Benedict was standing over her with a whip. He struck her. I saw the blood." Sarah's voice broke. She was screaming. Victor Stratton rose for cross-examination, his movements fluid and confident. "Miss Mitchell, you say this was 9 in the evening in February. That's winter. It would have been dark. There was a lamp burning in the room. A single lamp. From how far away? Maybe 60 feet. 60 feet at night with only one source of light. Isn't it possible you misinterpreted what you saw? Perhaps Sister Helena was engaged in a spiritual exercise, mortification of the flesh, a practice with centuries of precedent in the Catholic tradition." "I know what I saw. She was tied down. There was blood on the floor." "Or perhaps you saw shadows and your imagination filled in the rest. You're not Catholic, are you, Miss Mitchell?" "No, I'm Methodist." "So you're unfamiliar with Catholic practices, unfamiliar with the traditions of religious discipline that have been part of the Church since its founding." I'm familiar with the difference between prayer and torture. Stratton smiled thinly. Your interpretation. Nothing further. Sarah stepped down, her face flushed. Daniel called his next witness. The prosecution calls Mother Superior Ruth. The old nun made her way slowly to the stand. At 61, she looked even older, bent by the weight of what she carried. Her hands trembled as she placed them on the Bible. Daniel's voice was soft. Mother Ruth, how long have you served at Sacred Heart Convent? 12 years. And during that time were you aware of Father Benedict's methods of spiritual discipline? Ruth closed her eyes. I was. Please tell the court what you knew. I knew that Father Benedict would call certain young women to the chapel of penance. I knew they would go in whole and come out broken. I knew because I heard them. Every Wednesday night for 8 years I heard Sister Helena scream. My room was directly above the chapel. I would lie in my bed and pray for it to stop. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Did you ever intervene? Daniel asked. No. A tear rolled down Ruth's face. I told myself it wasn't my place, that Father Benedict knew better than I did, that this was God's will. I was wrong. I was terribly, horribly wrong. Why are you testifying now? Ruth looked at Helena. Because I saw her in that wagon, saw the rope burns on her wrists, and I realized I had been complicit in torture for 8 years. I chose institutional loyalty over human decency, and I can never forgive myself for that. Stratton's cross-examination was brutal. Mother Ruth, you're 61 years old. You're hearing your memory, these things fade with age. My memory is perfect, Mr. Stratton. I remember every Wednesday, every scream. You've dedicated your life to the church, but you've never advanced beyond Mother Superior of a small convent in Colorado Territory. Isn't it true you petitioned Bishop Carlisle for a promotion 3 years ago and were denied? That has nothing to do with... Isn't it true that Father Benedict was one of the people who recommended against your promotion, said you lacked the spiritual strength for greater responsibility? Ruth's face crumpled. Yes. So you have a grudge against Father Benedict, a reason to want to see him disgraced. I have a conscience, Mr. Stratton. That's my reason. Your conscience or your wounded pride, no further questions. Daniel called Dr. Abigail Price next. She brought the medical evidence photographs of Helena's back, taken 3 days after the rescue diagrams showing the location and age of each scar, detailed notes about the rope burns, the broken ribs, the malnutrition. In my professional opinion, Abigail said, her voice clinical and precise, Sister Helena Ward was subjected to systematic physical abuse over a period of several years. The scarring pattern is consistent with repeated whipping. The rope burns indicate prolonged restraint. The rib fractures healed improperly, suggesting they were never treated. This was not spiritual discipline. This was torture. Stratton tried to undermine her credibility. Dr. Price, you're the only female physician in this territory. Is that correct? I am. And isn't it true that many in the medical community question your credentials, that there are those who believe women lack the necessary temperament for medical practice? Abigail's eyes went cold. They can question all they want, Mr. Stratton. The scars don't lie. But your interpretation of those scars might be colored by your personal biases. You're known as a supporter of women's suffrage, an advocate for what you call women's rights. Might that not lead you to see abuse where a male doctor might see legitimate religious practice? A male doctor would see the same thing I see. 23 scars, 2 broken ribs, evidence of prolonged starvation and systematic torture. That's not interpretation, that's medical fact. Reverend Nathan Shepard testified next, telling the story of Sister Mary Porter and his failed attempt to help her 3 years ago. Stratton painted him as a jealous man, a Protestant minister attacking a Catholic priest out of sectarian prejudice. By the time Ethan was called to the stand, the afternoon sun slanted through the windows and the crowd had grown restless. He walked to the front, placed his hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Daniel led him through the events of July 23rd, the delivery of quinine, the sound from the window. what he had seen in the chapel of penance. "And what did you do then, Mr. Frost?" "I came to you, reported what I'd seen. We rode to Boulder to get a warrant from Judge Hayes." "Why not simply rescue Sister Helena yourself? You were armed. You could have taken her from the convent by force." "Because I'd done that before. Acted without authorization, and it ended badly." This was the opening Stratton had been waiting for. He rose, a predator scenting blood. "Mr. Frost, is it true you were a United States Marshal?" "I was." "And is it true you resigned your commission in December of 1876? "Yes." "Why did you resign?" Ethan met his eyes. "Because 6 children died while under my protection." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Stratton moved closer. "6 children. Tell us what happened." "We found them in a warehouse in Chicago. They'd been kidnapped by a trafficking ring. My supervisor ordered me to wait for federal authorization before moving them. I followed orders. 72 hours later, the warehouse burned. All 6 children died." "So you admit you have a history of poor judgment." "I have a history of following orders when I should have followed my conscience." "But regardless of your reasoning, children died because of choices you made. Isn't it possible your judgment is similarly flawed here, that you saw something innocent and your guilt twisted it into something sinister?" Ethan reached into his coat pocket. "I saw a woman being tortured. There was nothing innocent about it. You saw what you wanted to see. A chance for redemption. A way to assuage your guilty conscience by playing the hero." "I have evidence," Ethan interrupted. He pulled out the yellow ribbon, held it up. "This belonged to Emma Hayes. She was 11 years old. Her father was my partner. He died saving my life, and with his last breath he made me promise to protect Emma." The courtroom went completely silent. "I found Emma in that warehouse." Ethan continued, his voice steady. "I promised her I'd come back in 3 days. I kept my promise. I followed the rules. I trusted the system. And when I came back, Emma was dead. This ribbon was all they found. She'd been holding it when she died." He looked at Stratton. "For 2 years I've carried this, a reminder of what happens when good men do nothing. When I saw Sister Helena through that window, when she looked at me and said the same words Emma had said, I had a choice. Make the same mistake twice or act. I chose to act, and Sister Helena is alive because I didn't wait for permission this time." Stratton opened his mouth, but before he could speak, the back doors of the courtroom opened. A tall man in an expensive suit strode in, his silver hair gleaming in the afternoon light. Senator William Bradford. 2 bodyguards flanked him, and behind them came Owen Cross, a satisfied smile on his face. Bradford walked straight to the front of the room. "Your Honor, I apologize for my tardiness. I came as soon as I heard about this travesty. I'm here to testify on behalf of Father Benedict Cross, a man of God being persecuted by those who don't understand the sacred traditions of the Church." Judge Hayes frowned. "Senator Bradford, I wasn't aware you were on the witness list." "A last-minute addition, Your Honor, but a necessary one. I've known Father Benedict for 15 years. I can speak to his character." "Very well. Mr. Frost, you may step down. Senator Bradford, please take the stand." Ethan returned to his seat, his heart hammering. Daniel caught his eye, gave a small nod. They had planned for this. They were ready. Bradford took the oath, settled into the chair with the ease of a man comfortable with public speaking. "Senator Bradford," Stratton began, "how long have you known Father Benedict Cross?" 14 years. I first met him in Pennsylvania in 1864 when I was serving in the state legislature. He was already known as a man of deep faith and uncompromising moral standards. In your observation, is Father Benedict capable of the acts described in this trial? Absolutely not. Father Benedict is dedicated to spiritual guidance. Any discipline he administered was within the bounds of religious practice. The Catholic Church has a long tradition of mortification of the flesh, of using physical hardship to strengthen the soul. Those unfamiliar with these traditions might misunderstand them. Thank you, Senator. No further questions. Daniel stood. I have some questions, if it please the court. Bradford smiled. Of course. Senator, where were you in December of 1876? The smile faltered slightly. I don't recall. That was nearly 2 years ago. Let me refresh your memory. You were in Chicago, where 6 children died in a warehouse fire. I had nothing to do with that tragedy. Didn't you? Daniel approached the witness stand. Isn't it true that you were connected to the trafficking ring that kidnapped those children? That you paid Marshal Supervisor Warren Blake $5,000 to delay their rescue? Bradford's face went red. That's a lie, a vicious, unfounded accusation. Is it? Daniel turned to Judge Hayes. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence a letter written by Warren Blake on his deathbed, a signed, notarized confession. He handed the document to the judge. Eleanor Hayes read it, her expression growing darker with each line. This is authentic, she asked. Yes, Your Honor. Notarized by Father Thomas Murphy and Dr. Samuel Reeves, both of whom attended Blake's deathbed. Blake died in Montana 8 months ago, but before he passed, he confessed to taking bribes from Senator Bradford and others to obstruct the Emma Hayes investigation. Bradford stood. That's a forgery. Blake was a known drunkard. His word means nothing. He names you specifically, Daniel said. $5,000. Paid in cash on December 15, 1876. 1 day before the warehouse burned. He also names 3 other men involved in the trafficking ring. He looked at Bradford, his voice hard. You paid to delay justice. 6 children burned to death. One of them was Emma Hayes, daughter of Marshal Jonathan Hayes. Mr. Frost had promised her father he'd protect her. He found her alive in that warehouse, but he followed orders. He waited for authorization. The kind of authorization you paid Blake to delay. The courtroom erupted. People shouted. The judge hammered her gavel. Order, order. Bradford's composure cracked. This is outrageous. I'm a United States Senator. You can't treat me like a common criminal. Judge Hayes's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Senator Bradford, you're under arrest for obstruction of justice and conspiracy. Bailiff, detain him. You can't do this. I have immunity. Not in my court. Eleanor turned to the deputies. Escort Senator Bradford to a holding cell. We'll contact federal marshals in Denver. As the deputies moved forward, Bradford tried to run. He made it 3 steps before Daniel caught him twisting his arm behind his back. The senator screamed, struggling, all dignity abandoned. You're finished, Morgan. All of you. I have friends in Washington. They'll bury you. They can try, Daniel said. He nodded to the deputies, who hauled Bradford toward the door. As they passed, Ethan Bradford's eyes locked on his. This is your fault, Frost. You couldn't save those children, so now you're trying to destroy me. Ethan stepped forward, grabbed Bradford by the collar despite the deputies' protests. His voice was low, deadly calm. No, Senator. You destroyed yourself the moment you decided children's lives were worth less than your reputation. Emma Hayes trusted me, and I failed her because I trusted you. That ends today. He released Bradford, who stumbled backward, all composure shattered. Take him away, Judge Hayes said quietly. You couldn't save those children, so now you're trying to destroy me. But I'll walk free. I always do. Ethan stood. He was aware of every eye in the courtroom on him, but he didn't care. He moved into the aisle, blocking Bradford's path. Her name was Emma Hayes, he said quietly. She was 11 years old. You paid to delay her rescue so you could cover your tracks. I know because Blake told me. Before he died, he sent me that letter. He couldn't face God without confessing. He pulled out the yellow ribbon again, held it inches from Bradford's face. Emma was holding this when she died, clutching it so hard they could barely pry it from her fingers. She trusted me to save her, and you made sure I failed. Bradford's face went pale. I didn't. I never meant for anyone to die. But they did. 6 children, and you walked away without facing any consequences. Ethan stepped closer. But not this time. This time you answer for what you've done. The deputies pulled Bradford away. His protests faded as they dragged him out of the courtroom and across the street to the jail. Judge Hayes gavelled the room to silence again. This court will take a 30-minute recess. When we return, the prosecution will call its final witness." The crowd filed out, buzzing with shock and speculation. Ethan stood in the aisle, the yellow ribbon still in his hand, feeling hollow. He had confronted Bradford, had seen the man arrested, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like opening an old wound and finding it still bleeding after all this time. Helena appeared at his side. "Are you all right?" "I don't know." He looked at her. "I wanted to feel something, satisfaction, justice, but all I feel is tired." "That's because this isn't your justice," she said gently. "It's Emma's, and she's not here to see it." "No, she's not." Helena took his hand. "But I am. And what you just did, exposing yourself like that, using your pain to stop Bradford from helping Father Benedict, that took more courage than I can imagine. I just told the truth that's haunted you for 2 years, the truth you ran from." She squeezed his fingers. "You stood in front of this entire town and admitted your failure. Do you know how hard that is? How brave?" Ethan wanted to believe her, wanted to think that somehow exposing Bradford would balance the scales, would make up for Emma's death. But he knew better. Nothing would bring Emma back. Nothing would erase those 72 hours of waiting while she suffered in that warehouse. But maybe, just maybe, it would prevent someone else from using power and money to escape justice. Maybe it would stop Bradford from hurting anyone else. And that would have to be enough. When court reconvened, the atmosphere had changed. Bradford's arrest had shifted something in the room. People who had been skeptical now looked at Father Benedict with different eyes. If a U.S. senator could be corrupt, could lie and bribe and obstruct justice, then perhaps a priest could too. Daniel called Sister Ann Fletcher to the stand. The young nun was terrified, her hands shaking as she swore the oath, but her voice was clear. "Sister Ann, how long have you been at Sacred Heart Convent?" 5 years. "And during that time did you witness Father Benedict administering discipline to Sister Helena Ward?" "I did, many times." "Please describe what you saw." Anne took a breath. Every Wednesday evening Father Benedict would call Sister Helena to the Chapel of Penance. She would go in walking. She would come out barely able to stand. I saw the blood on her dress. I heard her crying in her room afterward. "Why didn't you report this?" "Because I was afraid, and because—" Anne's voice broke. "Because I'd seen it happen before. To my older sister, Joan." This was new information. The courtroom leaned forward. "Tell us about your sister." "Joan came to Sacred Heart 6 years ago. She was 21. Within 3 months, Father Benedict began calling her to the chapel too. It went on for 8 months. And then one day he said she needed special treatment, that she was being sent to an asylum in Philadelphia for her spiritual health." "Did you ever see her again?" "No." Tears streamed down Anne's face. "We wrote to the asylum. They said no one by that name had ever been admitted. We wrote to other asylums, to churches, to the police. Nothing. Joan just disappeared. And you believe Father Benedict was responsible?" "I know he was, because 3 weeks before she vanished, Joan came to my room. She was planning to run away. She showed me her packed bag, said she'd rather die on the streets than spend one more day under Father Benedict's care." Anne looked at the priest. "The next morning she was gone, and Father Benedict said she'd been transferred for treatment." Stratton tried to discredit her, suggested she was confused that Joan had simply chosen to start a new life elsewhere. But Anne held firm. "My sister would never leave without telling me. Never. Father Benedict made her disappear because she tried to escape." When Anne stepped down, Daniel turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the prosecution calls its final witness, Sister Helena Ward." The courtroom fell absolutely silent as Helena walked to the front. She moved slowly with dignity, her back straight, despite the pain it must have caused. She wore the simple gray dress, her dark hair pulled back, exposing her face. As she passed Father Benedict, she looked at him directly, and something in her gaze made the priest flinch. She took the oath, settled into the chair, and folded her hands in her lap. Daniel began gently. "Miss Ward, when did you enter Sacred Heart Convent?" "October of 1874. I was 20 years old." "Why did you enter?" My parents died of cholera 3 months earlier. I had no family, no money, no prospects. The convent offered shelter and purpose. I thought I would find God there." "And did you?" Helena looked at Father Benedict. "No. I found something else entirely." For the next hour Helena told her story. She spoke calmly without theatrics, simply laying out the facts of 8 years of systematic abuse. The first time Father Benedict called her to the chapel of penance. The way he said doubt was sin, that sin must be purged through suffering. The beatings that came weekly, then twice weekly. The days spent locked in darkness without food or water. The constant message that she was worthless, sinful, deserving of punishment. She described witnessing Sister Mary Porter's death, the bruises on Mary's wrists that everyone pretended not to see. She described Claire Morrison's disappearance, the terror in Claire's eyes the last time Helena saw her. Her voice never wavered. She did not cry. She simply told the truth plainly and without embellishment. When she finished, Stratton rose for cross-examination. His voice was gentle, almost fatherly. "Sister Helena, do you believe in God?" "I do." "And do you believe that suffering can bring us closer to God?" "I believe that accepting the natural suffering of life can teach us compassion and strength. But I don't believe God wants us to be tortured. But the saints suffered greatly. Saint Sebastian, Saint Lawrence, Saint Catherine, for whom your convent is named. They endured terrible torments. They were martyred by enemies of the faith, not by other Christians, not by priests who claimed to love them." Stratton's expression hardened. "Isn't it true that you repeatedly questioned your vocation, that you doubted your calling?" "Yes, I doubted because I was being hurt. I questioned whether I had a vocation because every day in that convent was torture. But Father Benedict told me doubt itself proved my sinfulness, that if I truly loved God, I would accept the punishment without question." "Did you ever try to leave?" "Where would I have gone? I had no money, no family, no skills beyond prayer and housework. Father Benedict made sure I knew that if I left, I would die on the streets, that the convent was my only hope of salvation." Then Father Benedict himself stood unable to contain himself any longer. His lawyer tried to pull him down, but the priest shook him off. "You were full of pride, Helena," Father Benedict said, his voice ringing through the courtroom. "Full of doubt and rebellion. Every blow was an act of love. Every punishment was meant to bring you closer to God. If you had only submitted, if you had accepted the discipline with a humble heart, you would have been purified." Helena stared at him, and then for the first time since taking the stand, she smiled. It was a sad smile, but it was genuine. "I used to believe you," she said softly. "I used to think that if I just tried harder, prayed more, accepted more pain, I would finally be good enough, finally be worthy." She stood facing Father Benedict fully. But then Mr. Frost looked through that window, and he didn't see a sinner who deserved punishment. He saw a human being who needed help, and that was when I realized the truth. Her voice grew stronger. "You weren't trying to save my soul. You were trying to control me, to break me, to make me so afraid and so ashamed that I would never question you, and you almost succeeded." She took a step toward him. "But you failed, because someone stood up for me. Someone saw me as a person worth saving, and that taught me more about God than 8 years of your punishments ever did." The courtroom was absolutely silent. Even Stratton had no response. Judge Hayes leaned forward. "Father Benedict, do you have anything else to say?" The priest opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time he had no words. "Then this court is adjourned until tomorrow morning, when I will render my verdict." As the crowd filed out, Ethan caught up with Helena in the hallway outside. She was leaning against the wall, Dr. Abigail supporting her. "That was extraordinary," Ethan said. Helena looked up at him, exhausted, but unbowed. "I just told the truth, like you did. You did more than that. You faced him, stood up to him, took away his power. We took it away together." She smiled. "All of us. You, Daniel, Nathan, Ann, even Mother Ruth. He can't hurt anyone anymore." That night, as the town settled into uneasy sleep, Ethan sat on the porch of Dr. Abigail's house keeping watch. But his mind was elsewhere, thinking about the day's testimony about Bradford in a cell, about Father Benedict's face when Helena confronted him. The door opened. Helena stepped out wrapped in a shawl. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "No." She sat beside him. For a while they simply existed together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. "What happens tomorrow?" Helena asked. "After the verdict?" "That depends on what the verdict is." "You think she'll find him guilty?" "I hope so. We have the evidence, the testimonies, the ledger." Ethan paused. "But juries and judges can surprise you. And if he goes free? Then we start over. File charges in another jurisdiction. Contact the church authorities higher up. Keep fighting until someone listens." Helena nodded slowly. "Thank you for not giving up." "I'm the one who should be thanking you. You were so brave today." "I was terrified." "Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done despite the fear." They sat in silence for a moment more. Then Helena said quietly, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you think Emma would forgive you for what happened?" The question hit harder than Ethan expected. He thought about Emma's face, her trust, her last words before he left the warehouse. "I don't know," he said finally. "I'd like to think so. She was a good girl, a kind girl. But I'm not sure forgiveness is something I deserve." "That's not for you to decide. Forgiveness is grace. It's not earned, it's given." "You sound like a nun." Helena laughed, a soft sound in the darkness. 8 years in a convent teaches you something about grace, even if the lessons were painful. "Have you forgiven Father Benedict?" She was quiet for a long time. "I'm trying to, not because he deserves it, but because I need to be free of him completely. As long as I'm carrying anger and hatred, he still has a piece of me. And I want all my pieces back." Ethan looked at this woman beside him, this person who had survived 8 years of torture and come out the other side with her soul intact, and felt something shift in his chest. Not love, not yet, but respect, admiration, the recognition of a kindred spirit, someone who understood what it meant to be broken and to choose to heal anyway. "You're remarkable," he said. "No, I'm just tired of being afraid." The next morning dawned clear and bright. The verdict would be delivered at 10 o'clock. By 9:30 the courtroom was packed again, even more crowded than the day before. Word had spread about Bradford's arrest, about Helena's testimony, and now the entire territory seemed to be watching Covenant Ridge. Judge Eleanor Hayes took her seat precisely at 10. The room fell silent. "This court has heard testimony over 2 days," she began. "We've examined physical evidence, medical reports, and personal accounts. The defense argues that Father Benedict acted within his religious authority, that the discipline he administered was in keeping with Catholic tradition." She paused, looking at Father Benedict. "However, the evidence tells a different story. Dr. Price's medical examination documented 23 separate scars on Miss Ward's back, ranging in age from several weeks to several years. 2 improperly healed rib fractures, severe malnutrition, chronic trauma to the wrists and shoulders consistent with repeated binding." Her voice grew harder. "This was not spiritual discipline. This was torture. Systematic, prolonged, inflicted on a vulnerable young woman who had no family, no resources, and no way to escape. And it was done not once, but repeatedly over a period of 8 years. She picked up the ledger. "The testimony of Mother Superior Ruth confirms that Father Benedict engaged in this behavior with at least 3 different young women at Sacred Heart alone. Sister Mary Porter, who died under mysterious circumstances. Sister Claire Morrison, who disappeared and has not been heard from in 2 years. And Sister Helena Ward, who survived only because Mr. Frost happened to look through a window at the right moment." Judge Hayes looked directly at Father Benedict. "Furthermore, the ledger found in your possession documents similar behavior spanning 15 years and 3 states, 14 women, 14 victims. Some survived, some did not. You kept records of their suffering as if it were scientific data. You measured their pain and called it progress toward purification. She set down the ledger. You are a man of God, Father Cross, or so you claim. But the God I read about in Scripture does not command us to break the innocent. He does not demand that we torture those who doubt. He does not require suffering as proof of faith. Her voice rang out clearly. What you did to these women was not religion. It was abuse. And you hid behind your collar and your position to escape accountability. She picked up her gavel. I find Father Benedict Cross guilty of assault and battery, false imprisonment, and abuse of authority. I sentence him to 25 years in the Colorado State Penitentiary. The gavel came down with a crack like a gunshot. The courtroom erupted. Shouts of outrage from Father Benedict's supporters, cries of relief from others. Owen Cross surged to his feet, his face purple with rage. This is persecution, an attack on the church itself. I'll appeal to the governor. Judge Hayes's gavel came down again harder. Mr. Cross, if you don't sit down and be silent, I'll hold you in contempt. Your brother has been found guilty in a court of law. He will serve his sentence. She turned to Kyle Reed. Deputy Reed, you are guilty of conspiracy and obstruction of justice. I sentence you to 10 years imprisonment. Kyle made a choking sound but didn't speak. And Mother Superior Ruth. The old nun looked up with red-rimmed eyes. You are guilty of no crime under the law, but you are guilty of moral cowardice. You stood by and allowed these atrocities to happen. You chose institutional loyalty over human decency. Judge Hayes's voice was stern. I cannot send you to prison, but I can ensure you never again hold a position of authority. You are hereby removed from your post as Mother Superior and banned from serving in any supervisory role within any religious institution in Colorado Territory. Ruth bowed her head, tears streaming down her face. This court is adjourned. Bailiff removed the prisoners. As deputies moved forward to take Father Benedict into custody, the priest did not resist. But as he was led past Helena, he stopped. You will burn in hell for this, he said quietly. You have destroyed a servant of God. You have attacked the church itself. And for what? Your own pride, your inability to accept discipline. Helena stood. She was shaking, but her voice was clear. No, you will answer to God for what you did. And when you stand before Him, you won't be able to hide behind your collar or your position. He will see the truth. And the truth is that you used His name to justify cruelty. You perverted His teachings to satisfy your need for control. And you broke 3 women who trusted you. Father Benedict's face twisted with fury, but before he could respond, Daniel pulled him away. Kyle was led out next, his father Thomas Reed crying in the gallery. Then the courtroom began to empty, people filing out in small groups, some angry, some satisfied, all shaken by what they had witnessed. Helena stood surrounded by well-wishers, people offering congratulations and support, but Ethan could see the exhaustion in her face the way she swayed slightly on her feet. He caught Dr. Abigail's eye and nodded toward the door. The doctor understood immediately. All right, everyone, that's enough for now. Helena needs rest. You can speak with her another time. She shepherded Helena toward the side door, and Ethan fell in behind them, providing a barrier against the crowd. Outside, the autumn sun was warm despite the morning chill. Helena leaned against the courthouse wall and closed her eyes. Is it really over? She whispered. The trial is over, Ethan said, but the healing that will take longer. Helena opened her eyes and looked at him. How long did it take you to heal from what happened in Chicago? Ethan thought about that. About 2 years on the mountain. 2 years of solitude and silence. 2 years of carrying Emma's ribbon like a talisman of guilt. I'm not sure I have healed, he said honestly, but I've learned to live with it, and maybe that's enough. Over the following weeks, Covenant Ridge slowly returned to normal, though nothing would ever be quite the same. Father Benedict and Kyle Reed were transferred to the state penitentiary in Cannon City. Senator Bradford was taken to Denver to await federal trial. Owen Cross left town 3 days after the verdict, selling his holdings to a syndicate from California and disappearing into the West. Rumors said he had gone to San Francisco, or maybe Nevada. No one knew for certain, and no one particularly cared. Sacred Heart Convent underwent reformation under temporary church oversight. Sister Ann Fletcher, despite her youth, was appointed interim Mother Superior. The Chapel of Penance was dismantled. The whips and ropes burned, the room converted into a library. Helena moved into a small cottage behind Dr. Abigail's house and began learning medicine in earnest. She had a gift for it. Abigail said gentle hands and a calm presence that put frightened patients at ease. She also began teaching 3 afternoons a week, gathering children from the poorer families in town at Reverend Nathan's church, teaching them to read and write. Ethan helped where he could. He built an addition to the church for Helena's school, chopped wood to keep the stove warm. Through the coming winter, walked her home on the evenings when her lessons ran late and the streets were dark. They talked during those walks about everything and nothing, about the future and the past, about faith and doubt and the strange paths that had brought them to this moment. One evening in late October, as they walked beneath a sky full of stars, Helena asked him the question he had been dreading. "Will you go back to your mountain when winter sets in?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. The cabin was waiting. Storm was growing restless in the town stable, unused to confinement. The solitude that had sustained him for 2 years called to him like a distant song. But something else held him here, something he wasn't quite ready to name. "I don't know," he said finally. "Do you want me to?" Helena stopped walking. They were standing in front of her cottage lamplight, spilling from the windows. "I want you to do what makes you happy," she said. "But I would miss you if you left." The words hung between them, simple and profound. "I would miss you too." Helena smiled, and Ethan realized it was the first time he had seen her smile without sadness behind it. "Then perhaps you should stay, at least for the winter." "Doctor, Abigail says she could use help with the heavy work, wood chopping, snow clearing, and Reverend Nathan wants to expand the school. He asked if you might help him build additional rooms. You've been planning this. Is that wrong?" Ethan found himself smiling too, something he hadn't done much of in 2 years. "No, it's not wrong." As autumn deepened toward winter, Ethan became a fixture in Covenant Ridge. He built the addition to the church, working alongside Nathan and a crew of volunteers. He helped Dr. Abigail tend to patients during a brutal outbreak of influenza. He taught a 16-year-old orphan boy named Tommy Bradford how to track and hunt, passing on skills that might otherwise be lost. Tommy reminded him of himself at that age, hungry to learn, hungry to prove himself. The boy lived with his uncle on a small farm outside town, worked hard, asked good questions. Ethan found himself looking forward to their time together, found satisfaction in watching Tommy master skills that had taken Ethan years to learn. And every Sunday he walked with Helena to the edge of town, and they would sit on a fallen log and talk about the week that had passed and the week to come. One Sunday in early December, as the first snow began to fall, Helena said, "I got a letter yesterday from the bishop." "What did it say?" "That Sacred Heart Convent is being officially reformed. Anne is being made permanent Mother Superior, and they want me to serve as medical advisor overseeing the health of the sisters. Will you do it?" Helena watched the snow drift down through the pine branches. "I don't know. Part of me never wants to set foot in that building again, but another part thinks maybe I can help make sure what happened to me never happens to anyone else." "You'd be good at it." "Maybe." She turned to him. "What about you? What are your plans?" "I'm not sure I have any. For 2 years I planned nothing beyond the next day. It's strange thinking about the future." "Is it a good strange or a bad strange?" Ethan considered that. For the first time since Emma died, he was thinking about tomorrow without dread, about next week, next month, about a future that held more than just solitude and guilt. "Good strange," he said. "Definitely good strange." Helena took his hand and they sat together as the snow fell, 2 broken people learning how to be whole again. The winter passed. Spring came to the mountains, bringing with it new growth and the promise of renewal. And Ethan Frost, who had spent 2 years hiding from the world, found himself part of it again. He had not forgotten Emma. He never would. But he had learned that carrying her memory didn't mean carrying only guilt. It could also mean honoring her by being the person she had believed him to be. The person who stood up when it mattered, who acted instead of waiting, who chose conscience over procedure. Helena had taught him that. By surviving, by standing up, by refusing to let Father Benedict's cruelty define her. Together they had found something neither had expected. Not quite redemption, not quite healing, but something close. Something that felt for the first time in a long time like hope. And for now, that was enough. 3 months after the trial, on a cold February morning in 1879, Daniel Morgan knocked on the door of Dr. Abigail's house with news that would change everything once more. Ethan was in the woodshed behind the cottage, splitting logs for the winter stores. The rhythmic crack of the axe had become a kind of meditation, a way to quiet the thoughts that still sometimes spiraled in the dark hours before dawn. He heard Daniel's voice, heard the urgency in it, and set down the axe. Inside, Helena sat at the kitchen table with Abigail reviewing medical texts. She had proven to be an exceptional student, absorbing information with a hunger that came from years of having her mind constrained. Now she was learning anatomy pharmacology, the practical skills that would allow her to help others. Daniel stood in the doorway, hat in hand, his face grave. "There's been a development," he said without preamble. "Father Benedict is dead." The words fell into the warm kitchen like stones into still water. Helena's hand froze on the page she had been reading. Abigail looked up sharply. Ethan felt something cold settle in his chest. "How?" Abigail asked. "Prison riot at Cannon City, 3 days ago. He was caught in the middle of it. Warden says it was an accident, wrong place at the wrong time." "Convenient." Ethan's voice was flat. "That's what I thought." Daniel pulled out a chair and sat heavily. "I sent a telegram to the warden, asked for details." "Got a response this morning?" He handed Ethan a sheet of paper. The telegram was brief, clinical. Riot had broken out in the East Cell block. 3 prisoners dead, 7 injured. Father Benedict Cross had been in the chapel when the violence started, had tried to flee to his cell, had been trampled by the mob. "Do you believe it?" Ethan asked. "I don't know. Prison riots happen. But the timing feels wrong. Father Benedict had been there less than 4 months. He hadn't made enemies yet, hadn't gotten involved in the power struggles. Why would he be targeted?" Helena spoke for the first time, her voice quiet. "Maybe he wasn't targeted. Maybe someone just made sure he was in the right place at the right time." They all looked at her. "Owen Cross left town with a lot of money and a lot of anger," she continued. "What if he decided a dead brother was better than a disgraced one? A brother who might eventually talk, might reveal who helped him, who protected him all those years." It was a chilling thought, but it made a terrible kind of sense. Owen had the resources to bribe prison guards to arrange for Father Benedict to be in the chapel when the riot started. And a dead man couldn't testify about powerful friends, couldn't expose the network of corruption that had sheltered him for 15 years. "There's something else," Daniel said. He pulled an envelope from his coat. "The warden sent this. Said Father Benedict had given it to him 2 weeks ago with instructions to mail it if anything happened to him." The envelope was addressed to Judge Eleanor Hayes. Daniel had already opened it, his authority as sheriff giving him that right. He handed it to Ethan. Inside was a letter 3 pages in Father Benedict's careful script. Ethan read it aloud. "To those I have wronged. If you are reading this, I am dead. Perhaps that is God's justice. I write not to beg forgiveness, for I do not believe I need it. But I write to tell the truth, for truth is God's greatest weapon." Ethan paused, the words catching in his throat. He continued, "For 15 years I believed I was purging sin through suffering. I believed the screams were prayers, the blood was purification. I believed God spoke through my hand when I struck those women. But in this cell in the darkness, I have heard a different voice. And it asks me, if God is love, why does my love leave only scars?" Helena made a small sound, something between a gasp and a sob. Abigail put her hand on the younger woman's shoulder. "I do not know if I was wrong," the letter continued. "I do not know if I was right. I only know that Helena Ward looked at me in that courtroom and called me a man who breaks souls, not saves them, and I cannot prove her wrong." Ethan turned to the second page. Enclosed is a list of men who protected me: Senator William Bradford, Judge Marcus Harrison of Chicago, Warden Charles Miles of St. Helena Asylum in Denver, Bishop Robert Carlisle, Father Thomas Brennan of Pittsburgh. They knew what I did. Some participated. All benefited. If there is justice beyond the grave, let it begin with them. But there is one name I cannot include, for he is beyond earthly justice now. My brother Owen Cross paid Warden Miles $2,000 to ensure I would be in the chapel during the riot. He believed a dead brother was better than a disgraced one who might speak. He was right to fear. I would have spoken. I would have told them all. The third page was indeed a list, 9 names in total with brief notations beside each. How they had helped Father Benedict, how they had covered for him, how they had ensured that complaints disappeared, that witnesses recanted, that Father Benedict could move from place to place without consequence. "Sweet mercy," Daniel whispered. "This is everyone, the whole network." "Is it authentic?" Abigail asked. The warden confirmed it's Father Benedict's handwriting, and it's dated 2 weeks before the riot. He knew something was going to happen. Ethan looked at the list again. Judge Marcus Harrison. He was the judge who had refused to issue warrants in Chicago, who had blocked every attempt to investigate the trafficking ring connected to Senator Bradford. Warden Miles ran the asylum where several of Father Benedict's victims had disappeared. Bishop Carlisle was the man who had moved Father Benedict from Pennsylvania to Ohio to Colorado, always one step ahead of the complaints. "What do we do with this?" Ethan asked. "We send it to every newspaper in Colorado and to the federal marshals in Denver," Daniel said. "We expose all of them. And if they're as powerful as Father Benedict claims, if they can make this disappear too, then we keep fighting. We make enough noise that they can't silence us all." Helena reached for the letter, read it herself. When she finished, she looked up with tears in her eyes. "He almost understood," she said softly. "At the end, he almost saw what he had done, but he still couldn't quite admit he was wrong. He still thought maybe the suffering was justified." "Does it matter?" Abigail asked gently. "He's dead. He can't hurt anyone else." "It matters to me. Because if he had truly understood, truly repented, maybe I could forgive him completely. But this," she touched the letter, "this is a man who was starting to doubt his certainty but couldn't quite let it go, who wanted to confess but also wanted to justify." She stood walking to the window. Outside, snow was falling again, covering Covenant Ridge in white. "Send the letter to the newspapers," she said. "Expose them all. Let his last act be one of truth, even if he couldn't fully embrace it himself." Over the following months, Father Benedict's letter did exactly what Helena had hoped. Published in the Denver Post, the Colorado Springs Gazette, and half a dozen other papers, it created a scandal that reached all the way to Washington. Judge Marcus Harrison resigned before he could be investigated, retreating to a family estate in Virginia. Warden Charles Miles was arrested for running an illegal asylum, holding women against their will without proper commitment papers. 3 of the women Father Benedict had sent there were found alive, traumatized, but able to testify. Senator William Bradford's trial for obstruction of justice in the Emma Hayes case began in May of 1879. Warren Blake's deathbed confession, combined with testimony from other marshals who had witnessed Bradford's interference, resulted in a conviction. Bradford was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Bishop Robert Carlisle was removed from his position and sent to a monastery in New Mexico for what the church called a period of reflection and penance. Father Thomas Brennan of Pittsburgh was defrocked after an investigation revealed he had helped Father Benedict relocate multiple times to avoid complaints. The network that had protected Father Benedict for 15 years crumbled, exposed by his own hand in death. But for Helena, the real healing began not with Father Benedict's confession, but with a letter that arrived in March of 1879. It came from Philadelphia, forwarded through 3 different addresses before reaching Covenant Ridge. Sister Ann Fletcher brought it to Helena's cottage one afternoon, her face bright with hope. "It's from Joan," Ann said, her voice shaking. "My sister. She's alive." Helena read the letter while Anne paced nervously. Joan Fletcher had indeed been sent to an asylum in Philadelphia, but not the one the family had contacted. Father Benedict had used a false name, listed her as a charity case, ensured she was buried in the system. She had spent 5 years there, slowly recovering from the trauma Father Benedict had inflicted working in the asylum's laundry to pay for her keep. But when Father Benedict's letter was published, when the scandal broke and Warden Miles was arrested, investigations began into several asylums. Joan's real identity was discovered. The asylum's directors, facing their own legal troubles, had released her. She was living with a Quaker family in Philadelphia, now working as a seamstress trying to rebuild her life. And she wanted to see Anne again. Anne left for Philadelphia 2 weeks later. Helena watched her go, watched the young woman who had found courage at the creek finally have the chance to be reunited with the sister she thought she had lost. "She'll be all right," Abigail said, standing beside Helena as Anne's coach disappeared down the road. "I hope so. She deserves happiness." "So do you." Helena turned to look at her mentor and friend. "I'm getting there, slowly." And she was. Day by day, week by week, the nightmares came less frequently. The sound of a door closing no longer made her flinch. She could be in a small room without feeling the walls press in. The scars on her back would never fully fade, but they no longer defined her. She had become Dr. Abigail's official apprentice, recognized by the Territorial Medical Board. In a few more years, with proper study and examination, she would be able to practice independently. She had also taken over the school at Reverend Nathan's church, now teaching 30 children 3 days a week, expanding their curriculum to include basic mathematics and natural philosophy. And she had Ethan. Their relationship had evolved slowly, carefully, 2 damaged people learning to trust again. They were not lovers in the traditional sense, though there was affection between them, a bond forged in shared trauma and mutual respect. They were companions, partners in building something new from the ruins of their pasts. One evening in late April, as spring brought new life to the mountains, Helena and Ethan sat on their usual log at the edge of town. The aspen were just beginning to leaf out their branches, a haze of green against the blue sky. "I've been thinking about the future," Helena said. "Have you? Dr. Abigail wants to retire in a few years. She says she'll stay on to help, but she wants to step back from the daily practice. She wants me to take over. That's a lot of responsibility. I know, but I think I'm ready for it. Or I will be by then." She paused. "There's something else. Sacred Heart Convent wants to build a hospital, a real one with proper facilities for treating the sick and injured." Anne wrote from Philadelphia. "She's coming back in June and she wants to lead the project." A hospital run by the church, run by women who understand what it means to be powerless, who want to create a place where people are cared for, not controlled. Helena looked at him. "Anne asked if I would serve as head physician when it opens." "What did you say?" "That I would think about it. That I needed to talk to some people first." "Including me." "Especially you." Ethan was quiet for a moment, watching the light fade over the valley. "I think you should do it. You'd be extraordinary." "It would mean staying here, permanently, putting down roots. No more thoughts of going back to your mountain." "I haven't thought about going back to the mountain in months." "No. Ethan turned to face her fully. "For 2 years that mountain was my hiding place, my refuge from a world that I thought had no place for me. But I was wrong. I do have a place, here, helping build your school, teaching Tommy to track and hunt, walking with you on Sunday evenings." He reached for her hand. "I don't want to hide anymore, Helena. I want to live, and I want to do it here with you in whatever form that takes." Helena's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "We're a pair, aren't we? A disgraced marshal and a tortured nun trying to make something good out of all this pain. We're doing more than trying. We're succeeding." As the seasons turned and the years passed, they did succeed. The hospital was built, opening in the spring of 1881, with 12 beds and a small surgery. Helena served as head physician with Dr. Abigail, advising until her retirement in 1883. The hospital treated everyone regardless of ability to pay, funded by donations from across the territory and by the careful management of Anne Fletcher, who proved to be as skilled at administration as she was at compassion. Sacred Heart Convent itself was transformed, becoming a true sanctuary for women fleeing abuse, a place where they could find safety and support without fear. Ethan never returned to his mountain cabin. Instead, he became part of Covenant Ridge's fabric. He built a small house on the edge of town, helped expand the school until it could accommodate 60 students, taught tracking and wilderness survival to a generation of young men, including Tommy Bradford, who grew from a curious 16-year-old into a capable man. Helena and Ethan never married. The idea was discussed once or twice, but both agreed that what they had needed no formal recognition. They were partners in the truest sense, two people who had saved each other by allowing themselves to be saved. Helena lived with Dr. Abigail until Abigail's death in 1887, then moved into her own cottage near the hospital. Ethan's house was 3 doors down. They had dinner together most evenings, walked together every Sunday, sat up late talking about medicine and philosophy and the strange paths their lives had taken. People in town grew accustomed to seeing them together, accepted their unconventional relationship without much comment. They were Doc Helena and Mr. Frost, pillars of the community, respected for what they had built rather than judged for how they lived. In 1897, nearly 20 years after the trial, Helena became one of the first licensed female physicians in Colorado. The Territorial Medical Board had initially resisted, but her record spoke for itself. She had treated over 1,500 patients, delivered 43 babies, performed 12 successful surgeries. She had trained 3 apprentices who had gone on to practice medicine themselves. The hospital had expanded to 30 beds and had become a teaching facility, attracting young doctors from Denver and beyond who wanted to learn from the woman who had transformed frontier medicine. Tommy Bradford married at 23 and had his first child, a son named Samuel, at 25. Ethan taught the boy the same skills he had taught Tommy, passing on knowledge that might otherwise be lost. Samuel grew up with stories of the mountain man who had stood up to a corrupt priest, who had saved a woman everyone else had ignored, who had taught his father that courage meant doing the right thing even when it was hard. The stories became legend. The truth, softened at the edges, became mythic. Ethan Frost, the hero; Helena Ward, the survivor. The trial that changed Covenant Ridge forever. But Ethan and Helena remembered the reality, the fear, the doubt, the moments when they had almost given up. They remembered because they needed to, because understanding the cost was part of honoring what they had built. In 1915, when Ethan was 76 and Helena was 63, they sat together on the porch of his house and watched the sunset paint the mountains gold. "Do you ever regret it?" Helena asked. "Leaving the mountain, getting involved?" "Not for a moment." "Do you?" "No. Even with everything that happened, all the pain and fear and difficulty, I don't regret it. Because this," she gestured at the town below the hospital with its lights burning, the school where children were learning, "this is real. This matters." "It does." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged. After 40 years, they had learned that silence between them was not empty, but full, rich with shared history and mutual understanding. "Tommy wants to bring his son up to see you," Helena said. "Says the boy has questions about the old days." "How old is Samuel now?" 15, same age Tommy was when you started teaching him. Time moves strangely. It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. "Will you tell him about Emma? About Chicago?" Ethan thought about that. For decades he had carried Emma's ribbon, a private reminder of his failure. But perhaps it was time for the story to be told, for the next generation to understand that heroes were not born but made through choices, through failure and redemption, and the willingness to try again. "Yes," he said. "I'll tell him. All of it." 3 years later, in 1918, on an autumn afternoon, much like that first day when Ethan had looked through the convent window, Tommy Bradford and his son Samuel climbed the trail to Ethan's house. Ethan was 79 now, his hair white, his movements slow but still steady. He sat on the porch in a chair he had carved 40 years ago, the wood smooth from use, and waited for them to arrive. Tommy reached the porch first, breathing hard. At 48 he was still strong, still carried himself with the confidence Ethan had helped instill. "Mr. Frost, thank you for seeing us." Ethan nodded. "Samuel, is it?" The boy straightened. "Yes, sir." "Your father says you wanted to know who I am." Samuel glanced at Tommy, then back. "Yes, sir. Dad says you're a hero, but he won't tell me why." The word hung in the air. Hero. After all these years it still felt too big, too clean. "I'm not a hero, boy," Ethan said. "But I did make a promise once, and I kept it. That's what your father means." He rose and walked to a wooden box on the windowsill. Inside, wrapped in cloth, lay the tarnished marshal's badge, and the yellow ribbon faded now to almost white. "Were you really a marshal?" Samuel asked. "I was, a long time ago, before I came to this mountain, before I learned what it really meant to stand up for someone." Tommy and Samuel settled onto the porch steps, and Ethan began to speak. He told them about Chicago, about Emma Hayes, about the warehouse and the fire, and the 2 years he spent hiding from his own guilt. He told them about the window, about Helena tied to the table, about the choice he had made to act instead of walk away. He told them about the trial, about confronting Senator Bradford, about Helena standing up in court and refusing to be defined by what had been done to her. He told them about the aftermath, about Father Benedict's death and confession, about the network of corruption that crumbled and the lives that were saved when the truth came out. The afternoon wore on the sun moving across the sky, and still Ethan talked. Samuel listened with wide eyes, Tommy with the understanding that came from having lived through some of it himself. When Ethan finally finished, when the story had been told from beginning to end, Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked, "Did you love her, Miss Helena?" Ethan considered the question carefully. "I did. I do. Not in the way you might think. I loved her the way you love someone who saves your life by letting you save theirs. We healed each other." The sound of wheels on the trail made them all look up. A small wagon appeared, driven by a woman with silver hair and gray eyes that were still sharp despite her years. Helena Ward, now 74, climbed down from the wagon with Tommy's help. She moved stiffly, her back never having fully recovered from those years of abuse, but she moved with dignity and purpose. "Telling stories again?" she asked, settling into the chair beside Ethan. "Told them everything. Even the part where you almost gave up. Especially that part. The boy needs to know heroes aren't born, they're made through choices." Helena smiled and took Ethan's hand. After 40 years, the gesture was as natural as breathing. Samuel looked between them, seeing something he was too young to fully understand, but old enough to recognize as important. "Mr. Frost," he said, "if you could tell me one thing to remember, what would it be?" Ethan looked out at the valley below, at Covenant Ridge with its hospital and school and church, at the life he and Helena had built from the ruins of their pasts. "That doing the right thing isn't always easy," he said. "Sometimes it means going against authority. Sometimes it means standing alone. Sometimes it means risking everything you have." He turned to look at Samuel directly. "But if you see someone suffering and you have the power to help, you have an obligation to act. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Don't wait until you're sure." He held up the yellow ribbon. "Because I waited once, and Emma Hayes burned, but I didn't wait for Helena, and she lived." His voice grew stronger. "That's the difference between regret and redemption. Not that you never fail, but that when you're given a second chance, you choose differently. You act. You stand up. You become the person you wish you had been the first time." Samuel nodded slowly, processing this. "What if I fail?" "You will fail. Everyone does. The question is what you do after. Do you hide like I did on this mountain for 2 years? Or do you try again? Do you keep fighting for what's right, even when it's hard?" Helena squeezed Ethan's hand. One person standing up at the right moment can change everything. You changed me. I changed you. Together we changed this town, and everyone who came through that hospital, everyone who learned at that school." She looked at Samuel with those gray eyes that had seen so much pain and had chosen not to let it destroy her. "That's your legacy if you choose to take it. Not perfection, not fearlessness, just the willingness to act when it matters." Tommy and Samuel left as the sun began to set, riding down the mountain with their heads full of stories and lessons. Ethan watched them go, feeling the weight of years, but also the satisfaction of a story well told. Helena stayed. She often did now, her cottage in town feeling too empty, too quiet. They would sit together on the porch watching the stars emerge, talking or not talking as the mood took them. "Do you think he understood?" Helena asked. "Maybe, or maybe he will when he faces his own choice between doing what's easy and doing what's right. We can't protect him from that. No, but we can give him the tools to make the right choice. That's all any of us can do." They sat in comfortable silence as night fell. After 40 years they had learned that some truths didn't need words. The warmth of a hand in yours, the knowledge that you were not alone, the understanding that healing was not the absence of scars, but the choice to keep living despite them. "Come inside," Ethan said when the chill grew too deep. "I'll make tea." Helena followed him into the small house, moving carefully, favoring her back. The fire was already burning in the stone hearth Ethan had built himself, casting warm light across the simple furniture he had made with his own hands. They settled into chairs on either side of the fire. Ethan poured tea from the pot he kept warm on the stove. They sat and sipped and watched the flames dance. "I got a letter from Anne yesterday," Helena said. "From the hospital. They're treating more patients than ever. The new wing is already at capacity." "That's good." She also said the church is considering canonizing Sister Mary Porter, recognizing her as a martyr for exposing Father Benedict's crimes. Ethan raised his eyebrows. After they spent so long protecting him, times change. The church is trying to make amends, to acknowledge what happened and honor those who suffered. Helena paused. "Anne asked if I would speak at the ceremony if it happens. Will you?" "I don't know." "Don't. Part of me thinks Mary deserves recognition, but another part thinks the best way to honor her is to keep doing the work, to keep helping people, to make sure what happened to us never happens to anyone else." "You've done that. The hospital, the training program, the reforms at Sacred Heart. You've saved more lives than we can count." "We've saved them. You built that school. You taught those boys to be men of integrity, Tommy and Samuel and all the others. We did it together." Helena nodded, her eyes bright despite the tears. "Yes, together." They finished their tea in silence. The fire burned low. The night deepened. When Helena stood to leave, Ethan walked her to the door. She paused on the threshold, looking back at him. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything, for coming back, for standing up, for staying. Thank you for letting me, for trusting me when you had no reason to trust anyone." She reached up and touched his face, a gesture of affection that had taken years to become comfortable. "We saved each other," she said. "That's what you told Samuel, and it's the truth." "It is." She left, then driving her wagon back to town under a sky full of stars. Ethan watched until her lights disappeared around the bend, then returned to his chair by the fire. He thought about Emma, as he sometimes still did. The guilt had softened over the years, transformed from sharp pain into gentle sadness. He had learned to live with it, to accept that he could not change the past, but he could honor it by living differently in the present. He thought about Helena, about the woman she had become. Strong, compassionate, whole. Not undamaged, but unbroken. He thought about the hospital and the school and all the lives they had touched. About Tommy and Samuel and the generations that would come after. About the way one choice, one action, one moment of courage could ripple outward through time. From the mantel he took down a small wooden box. Inside was the yellow ribbon, carefully preserved despite its age. Beside it was something new, something Helena had given him on his 75th birthday. A photograph of the hospital staff, 15 people standing proud in front of the building they had built together. Helena was in the center, her gray hair pulled back, her face lined, but her eyes bright. Around her were doctors and nurses. She had trained people who had learned from her example and were carrying forward her vision of medicine as compassion rather than control. Ethan looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he carefully replaced it in the box alongside Emma's ribbon. He could keep both now, the reminder of his failure and the evidence of his redemption. They were part of the same story, the same life. You could not have one without the other. He sat by the fire until it burned to embers, thinking about everything that had happened since that summer day 40 years ago when he had looked through a window and made a choice. So much pain, so much struggle, but also so much growth, so much good. The next morning, Ethan woke to find fresh snow on the ground. He dressed warmly and walked down to the hospital as he did most mornings. Helena was already there treating a young woman who had broken her arm in a fall. She looked up when he entered, smiled that smile that still held traces of sadness, but also genuine warmth. "Good morning." "Good morning. Thought I'd check if you needed help with anything." "Always. Can you organize the supply room? The new shipment arrived yesterday and everything's in chaos." "Of course." He spent the morning working alongside her as he had for decades, organizing supplies, helping move patients, chopping wood for the stoves, doing the 100 small tasks that kept the hospital running. At noon, they took a break sitting on the bench outside the main entrance. The snow had stopped and the sun broke through the clouds, turning everything gold. "It's a good day," Helena said. "It is. Thank you for being here, for still being here after all this time." "Where else would I be?" She laughed, a sound that never failed to lift his spirits. "On your mountain, living like a hermit, avoiding human contact." "That man died 40 years ago. I'm someone else now." "So am I." They sat together in the sun, two old friends who had walked through fire and come out the other side. Not unscathed, not unchanged, but alive, whole, together. 2 years later, in the winter of 1920, Ethan Frost died peacefully in his sleep. He was 81 years old. Helena found him the next morning when he didn't arrive for breakfast, sitting in his chair by the cold fireplace, his weathered hands folded in his lap. On the table beside him was the wooden box opened. Inside, the yellow ribbon and the photograph lay side by side, and beside them a note in Ethan's careful hand. "I didn't save you, Emma, but I saved the next one, and maybe that's enough." Helena read the note with tears streaming down her face. Then she carefully closed the box and held it against her chest. The funeral was held 3 days later. The entire town came and people from across the territory, dozens of men Ethan had taught, scores of families he had helped. Tommy Bradford gave the eulogy, speaking of a man who had taught him that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. Helena sat in the front row, dry-eyed now, listening. When it was over, when Ethan had been laid to rest in the cemetery beside the church he had helped build, she returned to her cottage and allowed herself to grieve. She grieved for a day and a night. Then she rose, washed her face, and went back to work. There were patients to treat, students to teach, a hospital to run. This was how she would honor him, by continuing the work they had started together. She lived another 5 years practicing medicine until the very end. On a warm spring morning in 1925, at the age of 71, Helena Ward died in her sleep in the cottage behind the hospital. They buried her beside Ethan under the aspens that turned gold every autumn. On her headstone, someone no one ever knew who placed a simple inscription. She stood up, and in standing saved herself and countless others. The years passed like water, steady and inexorable. The hospital Helena had built grew to 50 beds, then 70. Young doctors came from as far as Boston and Philadelphia to study under the physicians she had trained. The techniques she had pioneered, treating patients with dignity regardless of their ability to pay, spread across the West. The school Ethan had helped expand taught 3 generations of children. Among them were the sons and daughters of immigrants of miners of former slaves who had come west seeking freedom. All of them learned to read, to think, to question. All of them carried forward the lesson that courage meant standing up when it mattered. Sacred Heart. Convent became a model for reform. Other institutions, shamed by the scandal Father Benedict's letter had exposed, began to change. Abbesses and Mother Superiors across the territory wrote to Anne Fletcher asking how Sacred Heart had transformed from a place of suffering to a place of sanctuary. And slowly, painfully, the church itself began to listen. Tommy Bradford's son Samuel grew up to be a doctor, inspired by the stories of Ethan and Helena. He opened a practice in Denver specializing in treating the poor and marginalized. He trained his own apprentices, teaching them that medicine was not just about treating disease, but about honoring the dignity of every patient. Samuel had children, and his children had children, and the stories were passed down through generations. The details softened and changed, became legend rather than history. But the core truth remained. Two broken people had refused to stay broken. They had stood up when it mattered. They had built something good from their pain. And in doing so, they had proved that redemption was not about perfection, but about choosing again and again to be better than you were before. The mountain cabin where Ethan had hidden for 2 years eventually collapsed, reclaimed by the forest. But the hospital still stands, though it has been renovated and expanded many times. The school still operates, though it is now part of a larger educational complex. And in the cemetery beside the church, 2 headstones stand side by side under the aspens. Visitors came sometimes drawn by the stories, wanting to see where the mountain man and the tortured nun finally rested. They left flowers. They left notes. They left small tokens of gratitude for lives changed by people they never met, but whose choices still echoed through time. Because that is the truth that Ethan and Helena discovered and lived. That one person standing up at the right moment can change everything. That pain does not have to be the end of the story. That healing is possible. Redemption is real, and courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. Their legacy lives on. In the hospital that still treats those who cannot pay. In the school that still teaches children to read and think and question. In the reforms that spread from Sacred Heart Convent to institutions across the country, in the descendants who carry their lessons forward, and most of all in the simple truth they proved with their lives. It is never too late to do the right thing. It is never too late to stand up. It is never too late to choose redemption over regret. Ethan Frost learned that lesson in a warehouse in Chicago, failed it with Emma Hayes, and redeemed himself through Helena Ward. Helena Ward learned it in the Chapel of Penance, survived 8 years of torture, and chose to heal rather than hate. Together they taught it to generations, and that teaching continues passed down from parent to child teacher to student healer to patient. The names may change, the details may shift, but the core truth remains constant. When you see someone suffering and you have the power to help, you have an obligation to act. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Just act. Stand up. Choose courage. And in choosing, change the world. This is the story Ethan Frost told that autumn afternoon in 1918. This is the legacy he and Helena Ward left behind. Not a story of perfection or fearlessness, but of failure and redemption of pain, transformed into purpose of 2 broken people who chose to heal themselves by helping others. It is a story worth remembering, worth retelling, worth living, because we all face our own windows, our own choices between action and inaction. We all carry our own yellow ribbons, our own moments of regret. The question is not whether we will fail. We will. The question is what we do after, whether we hide on our mountains or whether we come down and try again. Ethan and Helena chose to try again, and in trying they succeeded. May we all be so brave. May we all choose so wisely. May we all stand up when it matters.